Hi everyone, I am Dream Into Wealth. I know people watching this are trying to fall asleep. How are you? And I hope you are okay in life. Listen to my story and make yourself comfortable. Also, if y'all like this kind of stories, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. The long ledger of Clay Wren, there was a night long gone when the rain fell hard enough to drown the sound of everything but memory. Clay Wren sat beneath the tin roof of his porch, coffee gone cold, eyes wandering past the fields that used to hum with cicadas. The kind of man who didn't have much to say anymore, but when he did, folks listened. Not because his voice was loud, because it was earned. Clay hadn't been born rich, nor clever, nor blessed by luck. He was born tired like the world had already tested him before he even drew breath. His daddy ran a grain shop that folded the same year the banks changed their laws. "They don't take your crop no more, son," his daddy had said. "They take your patience." Clay never forgot that. So when he was old enough to work, he took to repairing farm equipment for whoever needed it. He didn't charge much, just enough to keep the lights on and a pot of stew hot through the winter. Every night, after fixing other folks' broken things, he'd sit by the fire, count his coins, and think about why they never seemed to stretch as far as they used to. Not the kind of man to blame the world, but he did keep his ledger close pages worn, numbers neat, margins full of questions. That ledger became his life. Every repair, every barter, every bad deal he took to help someone else, he logged it. And slowly, through years of routing, Clay began to see a pattern no banker could. The problem wasn't that money moved too far, it was that people had forgotten how to sit still. Every deal he wrote down showed the same thing. Impatience cost more than poverty. Folks borrowed against hope, sold against time, and lost both. One evening, while mending an old tractor for a neighbor who couldn't pay in cash, Clay made a decision that would change his life. The man offered a handful of seeds as payment, some kind of hybrid corn that hadn't been tested yet. Clay smiled, took the seeds, and planted them on a half-acre of dead land behind his shop. "Ain't worth much," the man warned. "They don't grow fast." "That fine," Clay said. "Neither do I." He didn't touch that patch for months, didn't water it regular, didn't fuss over the soil, just let the rain and the earth decide what to do with it. Come fall, the field bloomed, not golden like regular corn, but pale and tall, stalks humming low when the wind blew. Clay loved that sign. He harvested slow, dried the kernels, and net something strange. They were heavier than any grain he'd handled before. Not just in weight, but in work. When he ground them into meal, the flour sold for triple what regular corn did. He didn't advertise it, didn't brag, just wrote a new entry in his ledger. Patience grows profit, not pride. Word spread. Farmers came from other counties wanting to buy his seed, but he refused to sell in bulk. "I'll lend you at," he'd say. "Plant it proper, let it take its time, and when it pays, bring me back twice what you borrowed." Not in money and trust. They thought him mad, but those who listened found themselves richer, not in cash, but in land and community. Clayfield became legend, not goes of what it grew, but goes of what it taught. Years later, a banker from the city came knocking, offered to buy Clay's entire operation, his seed, his recipe, even his name. "You could retire a rich man," the banker said. Clay chuckled. "Son, I already did. You're still working on working, ain't the same wanting." He turned the man away, poured himself a cup of black coffee, and wrote another line in his ledger. "When they F you gold, weigh it against your peace." The years rolled on. The younger folks started calling him the ledger man. Not out of mockery, out of respect. He'd sit by his porch most evenings, scribbling in that same notebook, offering advice to anyone who wandered by. He never charged, never preached, just told stories. Stories about men who tried to hurry rain, women who traded kindness for gain, and how every coin minted in greed carried a hole in its center. By the time Clay turned 70, his ledger had outgrown its binding. The pages were stitched in with twine, corners smudged, ink faded. But there was one entry at the back, written in neat, deliberate script. "Wealth is what left when the dust settles and you still got reason to smile." When he passed, folks from miles around came to his funeral. They didn't bring flowers, they wrote ledgers of their own. Some full or barely started. Each person left theirs at his grave, open to the last page. The wind turned the paper, humming soft through the lines, as if reading aloud. A week later, when the storms came, the fields near Clay Land lit up faint blue under the lightning. The corn grew again, unplanted, unwatered, standing tall, lay memory itself. They called it the ledger field. No one owns it now, no one dares to, but when travelers pass through on rainy nights, they swear they can hear a voice on the wind, low and patient. Take your time, son. The harvest don't care how loud you worry, and if you sit quiet enough under that same rain, you'll feel it too. That rhythm, that heartbeat of work done right and life lived slow. Ain't much of a secret to wealth, really. Just the long ledger of an honest man who learned that patience, not power, writes the truest fortune. Years rolled by, hot dust trails across the open prairie, and Clay Wren name turned from memory into legend. Nobody owned that ledger field, but everybody belonged to it in Zug quiet way. Farmers, drifters, bankers, even outlaws would stop there for a sell. Got to sit in the hush of it. You didn't talk much in that place. You listened. Because sometimes, if the breeze hit right, it sounded like the whisper of a pen dragging across paper. Soft, steady, patient. Folks said that was Clay still writing, still tallying the debts that mattered and forgiving the ones that didn't. Now among those who came through, there was a man named Ellis Brand, a wanderer born city-side. Red glass towers scratched the sky and coins clinked louder than hearts. Ellis had once been a broker sharp suit, quicker tongue. He could talk a man into trading his boots for the promise of a gold road, and for a time, he lived good off that talk. Big house, polished desk, cigars rolled from leaves he couldn't name. But greed has a way of sounding out applause that stops. When the markets turned sour and trust dried up, Ellis found himself sitting at an empty table, every friend gone quiet. His fortune vanished like smoke, leaving behind nothing but the ale of deals he'd made with men who never meant to keep him. One night, drunk on guilt and whiskey, Ellis stumbled onto an old rail line that hadn't seen a train in years. He followed it west, not knowing where or why, just letting his boots decide. After a week, half-starved and half-healed, he came upon that ledger field. It wasn't much to look at, just tall corn shivering under lay, but there was a peace to it, a kind that made a man set his burdens down without thinking. So he did, sat there in the dirt, stared out at the horizon and muttered, "Guess this is where the road ends." A voice answered, low and darling from the other side of the field, "Ain't the road job to tell you when to stop? That up to your feet." Startled, Ellis looked up. There stood an old rancher leaning on a cane, eyes like burnished brass. Didn't introduce himself, and Ellis didn't ask. They just sat a while listening to the wind slide through the stalks. Finally, the old man said, "You carrying too much sound, son." World quiet tea for a reason. Ellis frowned. "You saying I should forget?" Said the old man, smiling faint. "I'm saying you should learn how to listen." For the next few days, Ellis stayed. The old man, who everyone around vowed Cracker let him sleep in the barn, fed him corn stew and black coffee strong enough to wake the dead, didn't charge a cent. Just asked that he help mend the fence or clear stone from the rows come morning. Ellis didn't argue. He hadn't earned kindness in a long time, and it weighed on him heavy. One afternoon, while patching a section of fence, Ellis noticed a worn ledger sitting on a stump. He picked it up out of habit, like a man reaching for an old vice. Inside were notes, not numbers, not debts, just thoughts. Lines written in careful hand. The field don't judge the seed, only the time you give it. If a man's heart beats too fast, his harvest comes too early. Money is the act of work, not its proof. Each page hit, Ellis took a confession. He spent hours reading, long after the sun had dropped behind the ridge. When he finally looked up, the old man was standing there, arms crossed, watching him with that same slow grin. "Clay words," he said. "You found his ledger." Ellis blinked. "Clay Wren? I thought he was a story." "Maybe, maybe not. You tell me, don't them words feel real?" They did, more real than any contract Ellis had to sign. That night, sitting by the fire with the ledger open on his lap, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace that didn't need witness. He started rating too. Not about profits or losses, but about mistakes. Faces he'd forgotten, people he'd talked over, chays he'd buried under ambition. The pages filled faster than he expected, but his chest grew lighter with every stroke. Weeks turned to months. Ellis never planned to stay, but the field had a way of slowing time without asking permission. He learned how to plant again, how to let the earth decide the pace. He built shelves for the old ledgers, cleaned the tools, kept the cabin in shape. The caretaker passed one winter evening, quiet day of breath, sitting in his chair looking out over the stalks. Ellis buried him by the fence line, right next to a wooden post carved with one word: trust. After that, Ellis became the new caretaker. Travelers still came, some rich, some broken, all tired, and he gave them what Clay had given him: silence, stew, and space to listen. Sometimes he'd pull out the ledger and read a line or two by lamplight. He never added to Clay's book again, but he kept his own beside it, fresh pages filled with the names of folks who'd come through and what they'd learned before leaving. Years later, they say a banker from the city returned, same one who'd tried to buy Clay land long gone. Found Ellis tending the crops, gay in beard but sharp in eye. The man offered again more money than before. Ellis just chuckled, wiped his hands on his jeans, and said, "You would notice how every deal sounds like thunder before the rain? But not odd storms grow the crop." The banker left empty-handed, and that night a soft rain came, the kind that don't flood, don't frighten, just nourishes. The corn sang low, and in that hum was a voice old-days patience itself. Not Clay, not Ellis, just the land remembering every man who has stopped rushing long enough to let life earn its interest slow. And under that rain, if you listen real careful, you'll hear what all their ledgers meant. The secret wasn't in the pages, it was in the pauses between them.
The space where a man stops calculating and starts living honest, that where fortune truly grows, quiet, steady, and free. As the years turned, the ledger field became more than land. It became memory itself, stitched into the soil like ink dried into parchment. The stories of Clay Wren and Ellis Brand blended together, whispered in every trading post and campfire across the plains. Some swore Clay had been a prophet. Others said Ellis was just a drifter who found redemption by chance. But those who'd stood in that field knew better. They'd felt the calm that settled over a man's heart when he let go of hurry. They'd heard the earth hum slow and deep, reminding them that nothing good that came from rushing a sunrise. There came a season when the storms grew cruel again, big ones, the kind that tear roofs clean off and make the ground crack from too much thirst soon after. The basin towns started suffering, crops withered, livestock wandered, and folks turned mean with hunger. The banks closed their doors, saying they were protecting the system. But the system didn't feed a child or mend a heart, and people knew it.
They needed something steady to hold on to, something older than a promise printed on paper, that when a young widow named Mara Dales found her way to the field, she had 2 children, 1 mule, and a small pouch of coins that didn't add up to much. Her husband had been a miner who lost his life in a shaft collapse, leaving her with debt instead of comfort. When the mine foreman took her home in payment, she ran, traveled by night, following a rumor about a place where money was not the only measure of worth. The road was cruel, but the field was kind. She arrived under a dawn that burned soft gold through the mist, and there was Ellis waiting, older now, with a lantern in one hand and a thermos in the other. He didn't ask where she came from or what she owed. He just said, "You look like you could do a rest in a roof that don't ask questions." Mara nodded, too tired to speak. That night, did the rain drum soft on the tin roof, she listened to Ellis hum an old tune slow, mournful but peaceful too.
When she asked what it was, he smiled, a Clay lullaby. Said he used to hum it when the wind forgot its rhythm. Mara stayed, helped tend the field, patched fences, cooked meals for wanderers. Her children grew strong in that quiet place, learning to work the soil and keep the ledgers. She never once asked Ellis to pay her, nor did he at Uff coin. The work itself was enough steady, simple, honest. One evening, sitting by the fire, she asked him what made him stay those years. He leaned back, eyes half closed, and said, "'Cause peace don't come finding you, darling. You gotta give it a reason to stick around." Over time, Mara became the two caretaker in truth, not just in labor. When Ellis' hands grew too shaky to write, she took over the ledgers. But her pages were different. Where Clay wrote lessons and Ellis wrote names, Mara wrote stories. Each traveler that came through left behind a page of their life failure, heartbreak, small triumphs that might have gone forgotten otherwise. The ledger swelled with them, a tapestry of humility and hope.
Wasn't long before word spread again about the widow who traded stories for seed, who never turned a soul away. They started calling her the keeper of worth. Folks from far towns began arriving in droves, not looking for charity, but for wisdom. The world outside was changing too fast. Machines humming louder, people selling time they didn't own. But in Mara Valley, clocks ran slow and steady, keeping beat with the old hum that never really left. One cold winter night, a young man showed up at the edge of the property wearing city boots far too fine for mud. He introduced himself as Thomas Wren, Clay's great-grandson. Said he'd found one of Clay ledgers in an archive, thought it was just myth till he read Ellis' name beside it. "I came to see if the field real," he said. Mara smiled, "But realer you let it be." He stayed the night, and when the morning came, he asked if he could invest, put money toward expanding the land, making it profitable. Mara chuckled, poured him a cup of coffee, and said, "Profit ain't always progress, son.
You plant too much too soon, you starve the soil. He didn't understand then, but he stayed anyway. Spent weeks helping with repays, tending crops, listening to stories by lantern light. For the first time in years, Thomas felt quiet inside. No numbers running wild in his head, no ambition gnawing at his ribs, just work, laughter, and the rhythm of rain on the roof. When spring came, he told Mara he wanted to build something for the next generation, a coup, not one that taught figures and finance, but patience and providence. A coup for worth, he called it. Mara nodded, eyes misting a little. Then you better start by teaching M to wait for the rain. Together they built its simple structure, wood and stone, a bell hung from our old iron frame. Children from every direction came, sitting cross-legged on the floor. Thomas read from the ledgers. He taught them how to balance more than books, how to balance heart. He told them the story of his great-grandfather Clay, who planted patience of Ellis, who learned redemption and of Mara, who tended Doth.
And when he finished, he'd always close with Clay's final line. Wealth is what left when the dust settles and you still got reason to smile. Decades later, the world beyond kept changing, faster cars, louder machines, cities drowning in light. But the field stayed still, humming the same song. Pilgrims still came, still listened, still left lighter than they arrived. And through it ahead, that ledger grew thicker, heavier, not with ink, but with life. Now and then, under the hush of a soft rain, if you stand at the gate of that cool, you might see a shadow-broad hat, long coat, pen in hand, walking between the rows, humming low. Maybe it Clay, maybe it Ellis, maybe it every soul who had stopped long enough to remember that true fortune don't glitter, it grows. The seasons moved like chapters in a book too patient to end. The ledger field, now bound to three souls, Clay, Ellis, and Mara, stood untouched by greed, weather, long after Mara's hair had silvered and her steps grew softer. That same steady hum rolled through the stalks whenever the wind came down from the hills. Children who'd once sat in Thomas Red little schoolhouse now had children of their own, and still they told the stories by firelight, the story of a man who learned wealth from waiting, a drifter who found peace through humility, and a widow who turned loss into community. None of them wore crowns or claimed thrones, but every one of them left the world a little steadier than they found it. But progress, that restless beast, has a way of circling back no matter how deep you bury it. It came to the valley quiet at first. A new road carved through the ridge, telephone wires stringing like spider webs across the horizon. Then came the men with hard hats and harder eyes saying words like development and efficiency. They talked about turning the land into a hub for transport, laying rails through the soil that had birthed patience itself. They said the field was underutilized, such a clean, cold word for something holy. By then, Mara had passed, her rage shaded by the bell tower Thomas built. The school still stood, though time had gnawed at its edges. Thomas was old now, but his back was straight and his faith stronger than ironwood. When the company men came with papers and promises, he met them on the porch, ledger in hand. Mr. Drummond said, the one with slicked hair, "This land history is admirable, but think what you could do with the profits from this project. You could expand your cool, modernize the valley. Times have changed." Thomas thumbed the ledger open, not to a fresh page, but to one yellowed with age. Clay handwriting, still sharp in places, faded in others. He read aloud. "If a man sells the ground his peace grows from, he'll spend the rest of his days renting silence." He shut the book. "Times don't change, son, just the names of the mistakes." The man scoffed. "You can't stand in the way of progress." Thomas smiled thin. "I ain't standing, I'm rooted. They're the difference." They left that day muttering about legal avenues and permits, and though the valley stayed quiet, a storm was brewing. Weeks later, the county sheriff rode in with notice papers stamped and sealed. The field was to be seized by eminent domain. "It's the law," he said, hat in hand. Thomas didn't argue. He didn't nod it, walked to the fence line, and set the old ledger down in the dirt. Then he knelt, pressing a palm against the earth. "You've been patient with men long enough," he whispered. "Reckon it time you taught 'em bend." That night, a wind rose unlike any the valley had seen. It came low and growling, humming through the stalks until every leaf shuddered like a chime. Lightning carved the sky. Thunder rolled like an old voice speaking through time. When morning came, the field was gone. Not destroyed, not scorched, just gone. Where there had been rows of corn and earth, richy coffee grounds, there was now a flat stretch of glassy soil, black ink. No roots, no crops, no sign of the storm touch anywhere else. It was as though the field had folded itself back into the earth, ledger in hand. The developers came, confused, digging into that black glass to see what lay beneath. Their drills broke, their machines overheated. They called in experts who said the ground had fused under anomalous conditions. The reports taught it a geological mystery. The people called it justice. Thomas lived a few years more, long enough to see the companies give up and the road rerouted far to the north. Before he died, he wrote one last entry, not in clay ledger, but in his own. You can't own what listens. The land remembers who spoke kindly to it. He left the book on Mara Brave, tucked beneath a smooth river stone. Then he passed, quiet to rain. Generated later, no one farmed the ledger field. The soil stayed smooth and dark, unbroken, but the air around it still in that way that made you forget your worries and start thinking slow. Folks would come and stand at the edge, tip their hats and swear they could see faint shapes shimmering on the horizon, bursts of phantom corn swaying to music only the patient could hear. Sometimes on late autumn nights, truckers driving that northern bypass would pull over, saying they'd seen lanterns out in the dark, small, steady lights moving through the mist. They'd hear a hum too deep and warm, like a voice reciting figures not in money but in mercy. A voice saying patience grows profit, trust grows peace. And when the dust settles, smile. Maybe at Clay, maybe at Ellis, maybe at Mara humming that same lullaby to whoever still listens. But no matter who it is, every soul who stopped to listen walks away, changed, quieter, wiser, kinder, because in the long tail of that valley, the richest thing you grown was not a crop nor a fortune. It was understanding. Understanding once planted don't die easy. So if you find yourself driving through Iron Creek on a rainy night, roll your window down, turn off your radio, let the rhythm of the rain and the wind fill the cab. You might just hear it, the faint scratch of a pen across paper, the sigh of an old man breathing out contentment, the laugh of a woman who found peace after pain, that the ledger talking, that the earth remembering. And if you're lucky enough to hear it, maybe, you'll start reading your own story slow line by line, heart by heart, till your balance comes out even with the sky. Years went on, and though the field was no longer a place you could plow or seed, it became a kind of pilgrimage. Travelers came from far towns, wearing suits and ties, others with dust still fresh on their boots. They came not for profit nor out of curiosity, but for stillness. Word had spread that if you stood at the edge of that black soil long enough, your mind would quiet itself, and now those restless voices inside, the ones that counted loss, measured envy, tallied failure, would hush, and when you walked away, you'd walk lighter. Folks called it the listening ground. There weren't signs patent to it, no tours or fences or fancy plaques, just a dirt path curving off the old highway, swallowed by weeds if you didn't know where to look. But those who were meant to find it always did. That's how these things work, see? You don't look for peace. It waits for when you're finally tired enough to stop running from it. On one gay morning, decades after Thomas' passing, a man named Samuel Reed arrived at that path. He wasn't a rancher or a farmer, not even a wanderer. He was a hedge fund manager from the city tired eyes, expensive boots that never seen mud. He'd read about the place in some old newspaper clipping, one of those human interest pieces that city folk treat as myth. But Samuel wasn't after wonder, he was after silence. For years he'd been drowning in noise, the hum of elevators, the bark of deadlines, the tick of clocks that never seemed to rest. The deals had made him rich, sure, but they'd stolen something too. Sleep, meaning, maybe even his soul. He parked his black car by the ditch and walked. The wind was cold and dry, but not cruel. It carried the smell of rain waiting its turn. He followed the path till it opened up to that wide expanse of black soil, stretching far as the eye could squint. He stopped at the edge and just stood there, feeling foolish at first. Well, he muttered, guess this is it. But then a strange thing happened. The air grew thick, not heavy, not suffocating, just aware. Like the world had taken a deep breath and was holding it, waiting to see what he'd do next. The silence pressed against his chest and his pulse slowed. He thought about all the deals he'd made, all the faces he'd smiled at while planning their ruin, all the nights he'd told himself it was worth it. But standing there, looking at that still ground, he realized nothing had it truly belonged to him. Not the cars, not the office, not even his own time. He'd been renting his peace, just like Clay had warned in words he'd never read. Samuel fell to his knees, didn't cry, didn't pray, just sat. Hours passed, maybe more. The clouds moved slow, the light dimmed, and he started to hum, soft and tunely. It wasn't a song he knew, it was a rhythm older than thought. The same hum that had rolled through the corn, the same that Clay and Ellis had felt in their bones. And when he finally rose, his chest felt hollow in a good way, like a debt had been forgiven. He looked out over the land and said, "I get it now." After that, Samuel sold his farm, gave half his wealth to small farms that gone under, used the rest to build a foundation that taught kids how to handle money without letting it handle them. He never married, never chased fortune again. Instead, he spent his days traveling from town to town, telling the story of the listening ground in a voice that always cracked near the end. Folks said he sounded like a preacher, though he never quoted scripture, only truth. Years later, when he passed, a letter was found among his things. It was addressed to whoever finds peace last. Inside it read, "You can count coins or you can count days, but only one adds up when the sun sets. I found my balance ways the world forgot to rush. If you're reading this, slow down. The profit already been paid. The letter found its way back to the valley, and Samson's soul cunted to the old bell tower. The words faded over time, but the wind carried them jet fine. For even when the ink dies, the message don't, and that the quiet power of legacy, it doesn't demand to be remembered, it just keeps working long after you're gone." Eventually, the county declared the place a protected reserve, not because of its mystery, but for its meaning. People called it We Run Hollow. They built a small wooden bench near the edge of the soil with a brass plate that simply read, "Sit, listen, and leave, lighter than you came." Travelers still visit. They come burdening, they leave humble. Some bring their children, teaching them about patience. Others bring nothing but regret and walk away with hope. No one quite sure what happens there. Some say it's the hum of the land. Others say it's the air of generations who learned what money couldn't buy. But everyone agrees on one thing. The silence there ain't empty, it earned. And when the night falls and the rain begins to whisper, that field still hums like a heart too old for rushing. It hums for Clay, who planted peace, for Ellis, who watered redemption, for Mara, who harvested worth, for Thomas, who taught patience, and for Samuel, who finally balanced the books of his soul. Someday, friend, you find yourself sitting by a fire with rain tapping on your hat. You start thinking about what you've built and what it costs. Remember them, folks. Remember the hum. And if you close your eyes real gentle, you might yet hear that old voice again, drawling, soft, kind. Don't measure life in what you earn, son. Measure it in what you let grow. The fire will crackle, the rain will fall steady, and for a moment, you'll feel it too, that quiet ledger deep inside finally coming out even. And it always does, kept moving, though the valley seemed to drift outside its reach. The world beyond grew quicker. Machines talking faster than men, coins replaced by codes, and fortunes built from numbers that no longer clink or weighed heavy in the palm. Folks traded barns for screens, and silence became rarer than gold. But still, a hum held in that place, patient at edge, steady at a heartbeat under the dust. There were stories now, some tall and true, about the listening ground. Truckers swore their radios cut out when they passed it, replaced by the faint sound of pen on paper. Travelers told of lights moving slow over the field, wake lanterns floating in fog. Scientists came with their scanners and spectrometers, looking for magnetic anomalies or seismic signatures. They left scratching their heads, instruments humming, but no data explaining why they felt calm each standing there. A few of them took off their shoes, pressed bare feet into the cool soil, and cried without knowing why. It was one of those scientists, Dr. Caroline Hoyday, who started keeping notes not about how the field worked, but why it mattered. She came from New York, high rises and deadlines, a woman who'd forgotten what a full breath felt like. Her first visit was meant to last a day. She stayed 3 weeks. By the time she left, she'd resigned her tenure, sold her apartment, and moved to a cabin near the valley edge. "You can study the hum," she told her colleagues, "but once you hear it, you won't want to measure it. You'll just want to listen." She started a new kind of project, one that didn't involve formulas. She led people who'd found the field truckers, widows, kids, even a few old-timers from Ellis Day, still kicking around. They shared stories in the schoolhouse that Thomas had built, sitting around the same cracked stove he once warmed his hands over. No one led the talks, no one charged admission. They just shared stories of loss, of fear, of small miracles that didn't make sense except in hindsight. Caroline dubbed it the Worth Society. It wasn't an organization, more like a circle of open chairs, and each time someone spoke, the hum outside grew just a touch louder, deep enough that you could feel it in your chest. Now, it said that one night, years into her time there, Caroline walked out to the edge of the field under a crescent moon. The stars were out, glinting like dust on black velvet. She carried one of Clay
old ledgers, a copy preserved from the archives that Samuel Foundation had helped fund. She sat in the dirt, the book open on her knees, and whispered, "You were right, Clay. Patience is profit. I just didn't understand the currency." Then they set the ledger down right that the hum was strongest and closed her eyes. Folks say the next morning she was gone. Not vanished, not taken, just gone.
Her coat folded beside the book, her boots leaned up neatly, and a scent sprout of green growing out of that black soil where she'd sat, the first in 100 years. That little sprout became a tree. Slow-growing, strong wood, bark, smooth stone. Nobody could say what kind it was. It didn't match any known species. Its leaves were wide and dark, shining with a faint silver hue, humming when the wind passed through them. Scientists tested it, couldn't classify it. The Worth Society built a small fence around it, not to keep people out, but to remind them to approach quiet. They faded the listening tree. And from then on, no matter how busy the world became, the valley had a new kind of visitor. They came not to see the soil, but to sit under the tree. Executives on the brink of burnout, soldiers carrying ghosts, lovers who'd run out of words. They came, sat down, stayed silent, and somehow left a little lighter. Some wrote in journals, Ed sang. Ed just closed their eyes and listened. Every so often, the ground beneath would pulse, not a tremor, not an earthquake, but a soft thrum, like a deep breath from the world itself. Those who felt it said it reminded them they were still connected to something bigger than themselves, something older than fear. The Worth Society grew too, though it never called itself that anymore. It spread quietly, meetings held in barns, coffee shops, even online circles for folks who couldn't travel. The rule was always the same: speak slow, listen deep, measure less. They didn't talk stocks or salaries. They talked about patience, about gratitude, about learning the value of enough. Some folks laughed at them, called it sentimental nonsense. But others, especially the ones who'd seen too much loss, knew better. They felt it real well. Then came the day when the tree bloomed. It wasn't spring, wasn't any known season for growing, but overnight its branches were covered in small white flowers, soft as snow and fragrant to rain on dry stone. The petals drifted down and scattered across the black soil, and wherever they landed, grass began to grow, green and emeralds, tender as hope. Within a month, the field was alive again, not with crops or fences, but with wild growth flowers, herbs, and grasses the world hadn't seen before. The air shimmered faintly, hymning a note that every ear could hear a little differently. Some said it sounded like laughter. Others said it sounded like forgiveness. By then, most of the old-timers had passed, but their children, grandchildren even, came to see the miracle. And one evening, when the sun dipped low and the light turned gold, a small boy asked his father, "Pa, what that sound?" His father smiled, knelt beside him, and said that the earth remembering how to breathe. The boy thought for a while, then whispered, "It like it talking to us." The father nodded. "It always was. We just forgot how to listen." And so the legend carried on. They say the hum is stronger now, richer, deeper, not just the sound of soil, but of every heart that have found peace there, humming along in harmony. The ledger never needed another page, because the world itself became the next chapter. Every story, every soul, every moment of stillness, it all added up slow and quiet, till the balance came out even again. And if you ever visit that valley on a rainy night, when thunder walking slow over the hills, you'll hear it too, the hum of patience, the whisper of worth, the echo of all those voices that learned what it means to truly own your time. Not in hours or minutes, but in heartbeats spent honest. And maybe you'll find yourself smiling in that same quiet way Clay did, like a man who finally knows what his wealth was all along. When the years rolled further still and the world spun faster than any horse could gallop, that valley stayed steady, unchanged, unbothered, like a rock in the middle of a storming river. The grass that grew from that black soil never turned brown, even when summers came dry or winters bit hard. Folks said it fed off something more than rain or sun. Maybe faith, maybe memory, maybe the quiet gratitude of every soul who'd stopped to listen. A town rose nearby, not big enough to be proud, not small enough to be forgotten. They called it Ledger Rest. At a diner, a gas pump, a library, and a main street that curved gentle through the hills. Most everyone to work simple jobs, fixing fences, running the post office, teaching kids Haskell and how to read, and how to keep still when the wind spoke. They didn't build monuments to the people who came before because they didn't need to. The whole land was a monument breathing, remembering. Now every year come early spring, the townsfolk would gather at the listening tree. They'd light small lanterns, place them in a circle, and read aloud from old ledgers they'd kept over the years. Not the ledgers of banks or stores, but of kindness. They'd write down things they'd seen, neighbors helping neighbors, debts forgiven, crops shared, hands held when grief got too heavy. They called it the account of the good. And when the readings were done, they'd bury those pages in the soil, letting the hum take them in, folding every word into the story of the earth. One spring, a woman named Elsie Moran stood to read. She wasn't from Ledger Rest. She'd come from the city, tired, bruised by failure. She'd built her life on the chase, traded joy for achievement until her spirit went bankrupt. She'd heard whispers about the field, about the hum that healed. She came thinking maybe it was superstition, maybe nonsense. But when she stood there, wind playing soft through her hair, that cynicism melted faster than snow on a stove. She felt something she hadn't in decades. A stillness that didn't demand her attention but earned it. In Elsie's voice shook, she spoke that night. I came in with nothing but loss, she said. But I reckon I found something better than what I lost. Then they read from a small notebook stories of other people who'd helped her along the way, little acts of grace she'd ignored back then but now saw as gold. When she finished, she closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you, not to anyone in particular, just to the silence itself." And the hum, they say, grew louder, deep enough that the lantern flames flickered like they were breathing along. After that, Elsie stayed. She opened a little workshop in town. No signs, no prices, just a place where folks could brig what was broken and leave with it mended, even if it wasn't made of wood or metal. She'd listen while they talked, hands working slow, head bowed like a woman in prayer. When people asked what she charged, she'd smile and say, "You can't build peace, darling. Just pass it on." And they did. Bit by bit, piece by piece, kindness became the currency of Ledger Rest. There's a story that when Elsie passed, a let was found in her workshop. It was written to the land itself, addressed simply to whoever keeps count. It read, "I spent my years chasing balance sheets that never settled. Then I came me and learned the only true balance is between giving and resting. Thank you for teaching me how to stop chasing and start listening." They buried her under the listening tree, right beside Caroline Hoyt, not far from where the first ledger had vanished into the earth. And that night a gentle rain came. Not hard, not flooding, just enough to make the petals fall from the tree, soft to confetti at a celebration. Each pettit that tapped the soil glowed faint for a moment, then sank away, feeding whatever it was that kept that hum alive. Years turned into generations. The town never grew much, just enough to keep itself warm. Children were born, grew up, left for the city, then came back when the noise got too loud. Some brought their own kids, telling them about the field that taught folks the price of peace. The young ones would laugh, not quite believing, but when they walked out to the edge and stood quiet for a spell, the laughter always faded to awe. They'd hear the hum soft at first, like a secret whispered through the roots, then louder, like a heartbeat under the hills. And when they came back, their eyes always looked older in the best way. Even the town mayor, a wiry fella named Grant Keller, said it plain during the centennial gathering. Ledger Rest ain't famous, and that the blessin' waitin' here to be known, were he to remember, to hold the quiet like a savings account, one the world keeps drawin' from but never repaying. And longins this tree hums, we're rich. By the time Grant himself grew old, the listening tree had grown tall enough to see from the next county over. It shimmered in moonlight, its silver leaves whispering stories even when the wind stood still. Some nights, if you pressed your ear to its trunk, you could hear faint voices, not ghosts, but memories, layered like pages in a book that never ended. Clay Deep Drool, Ellis Laugh, Mara Soft Lullaby, Thomas Calm Counsel, Samuel Weary Redemption, Caroline Wonder, Elsie Gratitude, all woven together in a song of patience. And perhaps the most beautiful part of all was this. The hum didn't belong to the valley anymore. It began spreading through the people who came, through the ones they told, through the hearts they healed. You could hear it in the way strangers greeted each other with warmth, in the way folks took their time with small things, in the stillness that followed when someone chose kindness instead of anger. The world didn't slow down, but people learned how to breathe again. Somewhere out there, the spirit of that place keeps working, quiet and steady. Because that's what true wealth does. It multiplies without taking, grows without demanding, and hums without boasting. It's the kind of fortune no market can crash, no thief can steal, no man can corner. The kind that lives on in stories told by firelight and rain, the kind that starts at a ledger and ends in a lullaby. The next century carried on and still the hum lingered. Even as machines took to the skies and screens glowed brighter than lantern light, the valley held to its own rhythm, a heartbeat outside of progress. Ledger Rest became more of a whisper than a place on maps, tucked away in the folds of memory, visited by the kind of folk who'd grown weary of chasing the world applause. Yet, despite the quiet, something curious began to happen.
People far beyond that valley started speaking of the hum. They describe it in city apartments, on long commutes, even in hospitals where hope felt scarce. Like I heard a sound, they'd say, "Lo, patient, kind reminded me to breathe," and none of them could tell how or why.
Scholars, poets, and preachers argued over it. Some thought it folklore that traveled too far. Others said it was the echo of the human soul remembering its worth. But those who'd once visited the listening tree didn't argue. They just smiled slow, like folks who'd seen rain after a long drought. The hum travels, they'd say. It ain't bound by dirt, it rides on gratitude. By then, the old schoolhouse had been turned into a museum, not just wood polished by time, with shelves of ledgers filled by generations who'd come to learn what it meant to measure life rightly. Each book held stories written by those who found peace there, a child who forgave his father, a widow who learned to smile again, a young man who stopped running from himself. Visitors would sit at the same desks Thomas Wren once taught from, pen their own words, and leave the book open for the next soul who came looking. It wasn't history, it was harvest. And through all that, the listening tree kept growing, taller than church steeples, its roots spread deep beneath the town, waving through the ground like threads of memory. Some nights, when lightning struck distant hills, you could see the tree shimmer faintly, its silver leaves glowing like stars caught on branches. People said it was answering the sky. Others swore they saw figures walking near it, faint outlines of those long gone, their shapes moving slow through the grass, tending to the soil, humming that same eternal note. Now, it ain't often you can hate to a sin place and say it changed the way the world breathes, but somehow that field did. A quiet movement bloomed from it, nameless and unclaimed. No leader, no symbol, no mission statement, just people all over the world deciding to slow down, to listen more, to live honest. They started calling it still wealth, the kind of richness that don't need showing, the kind that stays even when your pockets are empty. Found its way into schools, homes, even companies. Meetings started with a minute of silence. Decisions were made with heart instead of haste. It wasn't perfect, humans rarely are, but it was progress in the only election that mattered inward. 150 years after Clay Wren first walked that field, a young girl named Leila Keller, great-granddaughter of Mayor Grant, stood beneath the listening tree at dawn. She was small, barely 16, with a notebook tucked under her arm. The town had grown a little by then, a few more houses, a coffee shop, a library with electric lights. But the heart of it was the same. The hum was steady, and she'd grown numb hearing it in her bones. That morning, she'd come to write. Not because anyone told her to, but because it felt right. She sat cross-legged in the grass, the dew soaking her jeans, and opened her book. The first page was blank, but her hand didn't hesitate. She began, "My great-great-grandpa used to say you can't own what listens. I think I finally understand. The world louder than Ed, but the quiet still finds a way through. Maybe peace ain't something you keep, something you pass on." She kept writing, her words flowing, yet the river nearby, about how her parents rushed too much, how her friends measured life in likes and followers, how she wanted something slower, truer. "I don't want to be rich," she wrote. "I want to be whole." And when she finished, she looked up through the branches, the leaves shimmered with dawnlight, whispering a sound she couldn't quite name. But she smiled. She didn't need to. That night, Leila's father found her notebook sitting on the bench beneath the tree. He opened it, read the words, and for the first time in years, let himself cry. Not from sadness, but from remembering. He took the book home, read it to his family, and the next morning brought it back to the schoolhouse to join the others, another ledger in the long story of the listening ground. Time carried on, and it always does, but that field never lost its magic. And when storms came, they rolled gentle through it, never breaking a branch. The people of Ledger Rest lived long, lived honest, and though the outside world barely remembered their name, the hum never forgot theirs. It echoed in every generation that stopped long enough to listen. And so the story continues. Not on paper, not in books, but in breath. Each time someone pauses before speaking, forgives for judging, gives for taking, the hum grows a little louder. Not in volume, but in reach. Because the truth of the ledger ain't bound to a place, it's bound to people. To those who understand that patience is wealth, kindness is currency, and stillness is profit, someday, maybe far from that valley, someone will stop under a different sky, close their eyes, and feel the faintest tremor of peace ripple through them. They won't know where it came from, won't know the names Clay, Ellis, or Mara, won't know about the ledger or the field or the hum, but they'll know what it means. They'll smile slow, breathe deep, and the world for a moment will balance itself again. Now that, I reckon, is how the long story ends. Not with riches, not with endings at end, but with the steady truth that no good thing really dies. It keeps humming, quiet and sure, waiting for the next soul who needs to listen. As the hum stretched farther than any road would carry, it began weaving itself into places that never knew its name. In far-off cities wrapped in neon and noise, at nights the rain would fall just so soft, rhythmic, almost melodic, and a stranger walking home late would pause mid-step, hear that subtle vibration under the thunder, and feel the world ease a little. They'd slow their pace, breathe in the smell of wet pavement, and for reasons they couldn't explain, their shoulders would drop, their heart would quit rushing. That's how the hum traveled, not by sound, but by stillness, passing through people ready to remember what peace felt like. In one such city, bright, crowded, sleep late, there lived a man named Jonah Reeves. He worked in finance, the high tower kind, which screens replaced sunsets and men wore time like shackles. His life was polished and empty, each day a mirror of the last wake, rush, trade, eat, pretend, sleep. He was good at what he did, but success, as turns out, is a poor companion. One night, while waiting for an elevator that never seemed to come, he felt it, the hum, soft, low, like the world taking a breath through his chest. He froze, eyes lifting to the dark glass that showed only his reflection, and whispered, "What was that?" No one answered, but the silence after felt heavier than all the noise before. He couldn't shake it. Weeks passed, and the feeling returned in quiet moments before dawn, after rain, in the hush between his heartbeat and the world demand for more. It wasn't madness, it was memory, though he didn't know it yet. So one evening, he packed a small bag, told no one where he was going, and drove west. He didn't know what he was looking for, only that the hum seemed to be pulling him toward it. After days of driving through towns with names that faded, off-road signs, and fields that breathed fog in the morning, he came upon Ledger Rest. Wasn't rocked on his maps, wasn't even lit by street lights, just a cluster of roofs and a diner glowing soft in the dark. He pulled in, ordered coffee, and asked the waitress if there was a tree round bee that listens. She didn't look surprised, just smiled that patient smile every local wore. "Out back of town," she said, pouring his cup. "Keep pawing the dirt road till the wind sounds like it's singing." He did. When the hum grew so deep he could feel it in his teeth, he stopped. The listening tree rose before him, taller than any cathedral, silver leaves moving without wind. He stood there a long time, unsure if he was awake or dreaming. Finally, he stepped closer, hand reaching out to touch the bark. The moment his palm met the trunk, his breath caught. Visions flickered through his mind, faces he didn't know but somehow loved. Voices humming in harmony, laughter echoing like a prayer answered long ago. It wasn't hoey, it was gentle. And in that quiet flood of feeling, Jonah understood what Clay, Ellis, Mara, and all the rest had lived for. He knelt, not from reverence, but relief. The kind that comes when a man realizes the debt he'd been paying his whole life was one he never owed. When he stood again, tears mixed with the rain sliding down his cheeks, he took off his jacket, laid it at the tree base, and whispered, "Thank you." Jonah stayed in Ledger Rest for months, helped at the diner fix fences, learned to greet the dawn without checking a phone. The townsfolk never asked his story. They'd let him be part of theirs. When he finally left, he didn't take much, just a journal filled with his thoughts and a leaf from the listening tree pressed between the pages. Before he went, he told Lila Keller, now grown and teaching the children, "If I can bring this peace back to the city, maybe folks won't feel so alone." She smiled and handed him a small old ledger. You'll know what to do with it, she said. Back in the city, Jonah didn't start a movement or write a book. He just lived different. Slower Kinder, he shared stories over coffee instead of contracts. He listened when others spoke, and little by little, people noticed how his calm spread at warmth, how his presence softened. Rooms, colleagues began asking, how do you stay so steady? He'd smile and say, ledger balanced. Then he'd hand them a blank page from the old book and tell them, write something you're thankful for, then keep it or give it away. Doesn't matter which, within a year there were hundreds of those pages floating around the city train cars, park benches, office desks, each one different, but each humming the same quiet note. Gratitude had become contagious, patience profitable. The world didn't know it, but Ledger Rest had just gone global. Decades later, when Jonah passed, his apartment was found empty but peaceful. No wealth, no clutter, just one then on the windowsill, that same leaf from the listening tree, now faded to gold, still whole after all those years. And outside, the rain fell soft, tapping its rhythm against the glass, a hum traveling farther still. People like to think stories end when the teller stops speaking, but that ain't how truth works. The hum kept on spreading, drifting through generations like pollen on the wind. And somewhere in another small town a world away, a young child pressed their ear to the ground one night and whispered, it's singing. No one believed her at first, but a few listened, and that all it takes, just a few. The field doesn't need crowds nor the tree applause, it just needs a listener, 'cause listening when done right ain't passive, it building something eternal. Clay knew that, so did everyone who followed. Now the hum belongs to all of us, whether we walk that soil or not. It's a quiet proof that patience never truly dies. It just changes form, carrying on like a melody older than memory, waiting for the next heart to hear it right. Long after Jonah's story faded into that silver mist of memory that time loves to scatter, the world turned and turned faster than then. The hum never vanished, it just quieted, hiding beneath the clamor of cities, the churn of progress, the endless march of clocks. But every once in a while, like a heartbeat beneath the noise, someone would catch it. A mother rocking her child through a sleep-late night, a farmer watching dawn spill across the fields, a traveler soaring out the train window while the rain drew crooked lines down the glass. They'd all feel it, that familiar steadiness, patient tame, breath, and though they might not have words for it, their souls would nod in recognition. One such soul was a young man named Eli Navarro. He lived oceans away from Ledger Rest, in a fishing town that smelled of salt and struggle. His father had run a small boat, his mother a corner stall where she sold mended nets and dried fish. Times were lean, the sea mean, and Eli had learned young that life didn't hand out kindness, you had to wrestle it from the tide. But he'd always been a quiet boy, watchful. When storms knocked boats, he'd stand by the cliffs, not praying exactly, just listening. He said once when he was small that the ocean hummed to him. His mother laughed and said it was just the wind through the rocks. But Eli wasn't so sure. He grew older, restless, and like most who dream past the horizon, he left, went inland, studied numbers, finance, markets, the language of wealth that moved faster than waves. Was clever, no doubt, and soon his name meant something in the circles that counted coins instead of blessings. He built funds, merged companies, helped men get richer. Yet, the more he gained, the less he slept. Nights stretched long, and even the sound of rain on his window felt hollow, like a song with its heart torn out. One night, sitting alone after another meal had shifted somewhere that didn't matter, he heard it again. Soft, low, like the memory of a lullaby whispered from far away. The hum. He stood, crossed to the glass, opened it wide, and there it was, floating between the raindrops, a pulse he'd known in a boy, now calling him back. He didn't question it. He simply packed a bag, booked what he needed, and started walking. He walked for days, sometimes hitching a ride, sometimes following the rivers that bent toward the west. The further he went, the louder that old rhythm grew, not in sound, but in sense. By the time he reached the valley, he didn't need directions. The wind itself seemed to guide his steps. Ledger Rest was smaller than he imagined, humble, worn, but alive. Children played near the diner, old men tipped their hats from porch swings, and everywhere that unspoken ease settled over things like dust on an old guitar. He asked about the listening tree, and the folks pointed him down the same dirt path so many feet had worn smooth. When he reached it, he stopped dead still. The sight near took the breath clean out of him. The tree rose like a column of silver flame, branches spread wide as if embracing the whole sky. Around its base lay stones carved with names he didn't know, yet somehow felt like old friends. He stepped closer, pressed his palm to the bark, and the world went quiet. In that silence, he saw flashes. Clay Wren bending low to the soil, Mara singing by candlelight, Thomas teaching by the river, Caroline staring in awe at the stars, Elsie mending a broken clock, whispering prayers for patience, Jonah breathing calm into a city that forgot how. They were all there, not ghosts but threads of something woven into the earth itself. Eli sank to his knees, tears spilling before he knew they'd started. He'd spent his life chasing numbers and in this quiet patch of the world he found value that no market could measure. When he rose again, something inside him had changed. He stayed in ledger rest through that spring, helping where he could, listening more than he spoke. He met Lila Keller children, learned the story of the ledgers, and even wrote a few words of his own in the newest book kept at the old cool house. I came seeking profit, he wrote, but found peace instead. If wealth is energy, then kindness is the highest form of currency. It pays dividends long after we're gone. Then, one morning before dawn cracked the horizon, he left. Not because he wanted to go, but because he felt he was meant to carry it on. Eli returned to the coast. He sold his shares, closed his offices, and used what remained to build something no one expected, a school, right on the cliffs where the ocean hummed. Not for the wealthy, not for the powerful, but for the ones who'd been told they had nothing. He hated the quiet academy. There he taught not only numbers, but balance, how to work with purpose, earn with empathy, give with grace. Each student planted a seed in the garden before graduation, and when the wind passed through those young trees, it carried the faintest, lowest hum. They said Eli never married, never sought fame, but his coup grew branch by branch until the world began to notice, not for its size, but for its spirit. Graduates went out and built things differently, companies with compassion, farms that healed lead, towns that thrived without taking more than they needed. The world began to turn slower again, just enough for the hum to be heard more clear. When Eli passed, he was buried beneath a young oak overlooking the sea. On his stone, they carved no dates, just a line from his own ledger. What you keep fades, what you give hums. And on certain nights, when the wind slid soft over the cliffs, the waves below carried that hum out across the water, toward every shore, every heart still listening. Somewhere out there, another soul would hear it and remember, wealth ain't found in the taking, but in the still, patient art of giving. Years drifted by. At the tide Eli once listened to as a boy, and though his body returned to the soil, his lessons never did. They rode the wind, found their way into hearts across oceans and borders, passing through generations like lantern light on a foggy night. The quiet academy stood proud on the cliffs long after its founder was gone, weathered but unbroken. Its walls carried stories in their creaks, and every plank seemed to hum a little when the rain came down. Children who never knew Eli spoke his words like prayers, often without realizing it.
Right.
They'd greet each day with that same still grace, starting every class by listening not to the teacher, but to the wind down.
The first minute was always silent. The hum, their oldest instructor, one of those children was a girl named Nara Vale.
Her parents were fishermen, poor but rich in heart, and they'd sent her to the academy hoping she'd find something better than struggle. She was bright, curious, restless, a spark too wild to be tamed by routine. But she listened deeper than most. While the other children fidgeted through that minute of quiet each morning, Nara sat still, eyes closed, hearing every note of the world round her. The wind, the sea, even the heartbeat of the cliff itself. One day, when her teacher asked what she'd learned from the silence, she said, "The hum ain't outside. It's waiting inside us to be answered." The teacher smiled, teary-eyed, and told her that was the best lesson anyone could have spoken. Years later, Nara became the academy caretaker. She mended roofs, taught lessons, tended the gardens, all while collecting stories from students who passed through. She believed those stories were as sacred as any scripture, so she started binding them together in a great book she called The Ledger of the Living. Unlike the old ledgers that measured things lost or earned, this one counted the unseen wealth. The patience shown, the kindness given, the peace shared. Each page held a name and a fee deed, written plain but heavy with truth. It not for judgment, she'd say, just for remembrance. because even the smallest kindness has its own hum. As the decades turned, the quiet academy became more than a school. It became a beacon. Pilgrims came from all corners of the world to walk its halls, hear the sea sing below, and add their stories to the ledger. Some were merchants who'd given away their fortunes, others wanderers who'd found forgiveness. A few were just weary souls seeking stillness after long wars with themselves. Nara greeted them all the same, with tea, silence, and a smile that said, "You've already arrived." One winter, when age had slowed her steps and silvered her hair, a storm swept over the cliffs. The wind screamed fierce, the waves crashed high, and lightning split the sky in two. The academy trembled under the fury, windows rattling like bones. The townsfolk below feared the worst. They'd seen storms take whole lighthouses before. But Nara stayed put. She sat at her desk, the great ledger open before her, a candle flickering low. And though the storm roared, she could hear the hum beneath it, steady, low, unbroken. She dipped her pen, smiled, and wrote her final entry. The hum never dies. It just changes singers. When dawn came, the storm had passed. The academy still stood. The sea lay calm and silver, but Nara was gone, her chair empty, her hands folded peaceful over the ledger. They buried her beside Eli Oak, and that night, the wind carried her name out to sea. Some say the waves whispered it for weeks afterward. Others swore that if you stood by the cliffs at sunset, you could hear her voice humming softly, mingling with the tide. The ledger she left behind grew heavier with years, pages filled with gratitude, stories of redemption, quiet victories unseen by the world. It traveled to libraries, museums, and homes across continents. People began starting their own ledgers, writing down what they gave instead of what they gained. Whole cities began observing silent Sundays, where the hum was honored with stillness. Commerce paused, traffic slowed, and families simply listened. The world didn't stop, it healed. Centuries later, when machines and minds reached beyond stars, there was talk of sending something to the new colony on Mars. Not technology, not laws, but the ledger of the living. It was said the hum belonged to every place touched by human hands, and if mankind was to start anew, they ought to bring their quietest wisdom along. So they did. A sealed copy of Nora's book was sealed in crystal and carried aboard the first ship. When it landed, the colonists built their habitat beneath a dome of glass. On its first night, when the red dust settled and silence stretched deep as the void, one of them opened the book, read the first line aloud. The hum never dies. And though there was no wind, no sea, the air trembled faintly, as if answering back. That was how the hum reached the stars. Not through noise or conquest, but through patience, peace, and the quiet promise that even across worlds, the melody of kindness never loses its tune. The colony thrived not by greed, but by gratitude. They built gardens where machines once stood, shared more than they hoarded, and each year, on the storm anniversary, they'd gather beneath the dome and hum, eyes closed, imagining a silver tree growing somewhere back on Earth. Maybe it still stands, maybe its leaves still shimmer when the moonlight hits it right. Maybe the soil still remembers every footstep, every whisper, every tear shed in its shade. And maybe, just maybe, the wind still carries the names of all who were listening. Because the truth of it is simple as breath. Wealth fades, but wonder endures. The hum keeps humming, passing through hearts brave enough to be still. No one could quite say when the hum turned into legend or when legend turned back into truth. All that was certain was that it kept moving slow, patient, like a ripple in a pond that never stopped widening. The centuries rolled on, and the hum found new instruments. Some called it conscience, others called it balance. Scientists said it was resonance, a frequency woven through life itself. Philosophers said it was memory, the eth of every good deed done. But to those who listened close, really listened, it was still what it had always been. The sound of the world remembering to breathe. The old stories were kept alive by travelers who wandered from settlement to settlement, carrying only words as their trade. They spoke around fires, under domes, across wasted lands, telling of the man who once listened to the soil, of the tree that hummed, of the academy by the sea. Most folks thought them tales comfort for weary hearts, but the quiet ones felt something stir inside them till they listened. They'd wake in the night with the sound of that low hum still in their chest, wondering if maybe, just maybe, the story was waiting for them to continue it. One of those wanderers was an old woman named Maeve Calder. Her back was bent, her hair white-eyed winter dawn, but her voice still carried the softness of rain. She'd spent her youth running cargo ships between the colonies, never staying long enough to grow roots. She'd seen stars up close, watched planets burn and bloom again, but through all of it, she said there was one thing that followed her, the hum. Filled her ship when she was alone, a low, even sound that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Some nights she'd say, I reckon the universe hums used to keep itself from breaking apart. When she finally laid down her work, she wandered. No destination, just following that pull like a moth chasing moonlight. One dusk, on a barren planet with red dust met violet sky, she stumbled across a structure half buried in sand. Its walls were cracked, its sign unreadable. But the shape of it felt familiar, arched windows, wooden beams, petrified by time. She brushed away the grit, squinted, and whispered, the Academy. How it had come May, she couldn't guess. Maybe a replica, maybe the original carried across centuries. Either way, the hum was strong inside those walls, strong enough to make her heart ache. Inside, she found what looked like a library. Shelves lined with glass-sealed pages, all marked with the same symbol, a simple circle with a line through the middle. In the center stood a pedestal, and upon it a single book. She broke the seal, hands shaken, and opened it. The first line, scrawled in ancient ink, said, the hum never dies. It changes singers. She laughed through her tears, whispering, you old fools, you were right all along. Maeve stayed there for months, repairing what she could, cleaning what she couldn't. She led others wanderers, workers, dreamers, and soon the ruin began to hum again. Not ducked with memory, but with life. The travelers planted seeds from every world they'd known, letting the soil choose what would grow. They built solar wells for warmth, glass roofs for light, and in the evenings, they'd gather round the great hall where Maeve told stories of Clay, of Jonah, of Eli and Nara, of the ledger and the tree. Her voice cracked with age, but the words never faltered. Every one of them, she'd say, found wealth not in holding tight, but in letting go. Before she passed, Maeve left one last message carved into the pedestal where the book rested. If you can hear it, you're part of it. Keep listening. Her followers turned the place into a sanctuary. They called it the Resonant Archive. People came from light years away just to sit in silence inside its halls, feeling the hum vibrate through the floor. Some said it helped them heal. Others said it helped them remember who they were. Scientists came too, hoping to measure it, to define it. They left with tears instead of data. For once the universe refused to be dissected, it only wanted to be felt. Generate later, children were still born near that archive. They'd grow up with lullabies that weren't sung but hummed. And when they came of age, they'd take a small trip out into the dunes, past the ruins, where the horizon shimmer of that water. There they'd listen. Every one of them heard something different, some a melody, then a heartbeat, then their own name whispered by the wind, but all of them came back chained. It wasn't religion, wasn't law, it was remembrance, a quiet promise between time and the soul. Stay steady, stay kind, stay still enough to hear the truth beneath the noise. The Resonant Archive became eternal, not because of its walls, but because of its purpose. Wherever there was quiet, it existed. Wherever someone chose patience over haste, it bloomed. And long after stars collapsed and were born anew, the hum remained, stretching through everything that lived and breathed. Some say it's the heartbeat of creation itself. Others whisper at Clay Wren, still listening, still smiling beneath that silver tree, nodding along to the rhythm of forever. And if you're real still right now, wherever you are, city, field, or cabin in the rain, you might yet hear it too. That low, gentle sound beneath the wind, steady to memory, patient to love that ain't much, just a hum of a world still learning to balance its ledger, but that enough. Always has been. They say that long after the Resonant Archive fell quiet and its walls turned to dust, the hum didn't stop. It just changed instruments. Yeah. The stars themselves began to sing. Every beam of light, every atom dancing between galaxies, carried a faint vibration. Astronomers from 100 worlds recorded the sound with their instruments, calling it cosmic residue. But to those who still remember the old tales, it was something else entirely. It was the hum, still moving, still whispering through eternity. And among those who believed, there was one man who listened harder than most, a drifter named Calm Ash. Cole was a scavenger by trade, wandering the ruins of forgotten colonies in a ship held together by wire and hope. He'd grown up in noise machines, grinding, engines screaming, screens flashing with endless feed. The hum was a rumor to him, something people talked about when the world felt too empty. But one night, lost in deep space after his nav system failed, his ship went dark. Total silence. For the first time in his life, he heard nothing. Then, out in the stillness, came a low, pulsing sound. Not mechanical, not cosmic static, something warmer, older. It was like breath carried through steel. He followed it. For days, weeks maybe. Time blurred in the dark. The hum led him to a dead planet, small and gay, orbiting a fading sun. No atmosphere, no sign of life, but the sound was strong, humming through his boots as he stepped onto the dust. In the planet's center stood a single spire, carved smooth of glass, reflecting light that wasn't there. He walked to it, laid his hand on the surface, and felt warmth. His pulse sank to it, slowing, deepening. In that moment, memories not his own spilled into him, images of fields, seas, trees that shimmered silver in moonlight. He saw faces, Clay, Jonah, Eli, Nara, Maeve, all humming the same unbroken note, their eyes calm and steady. He fell to his knees, not out of fear, but awe. When he woke, he was back in his ship. Systems were online, fuel tanks full, trajectory set for home. He didn't remember moving, didn't remember breathing, but the hum stayed with him, inside him now, in his heartbeat. When he returned to civilization, he tried explaining what he'd found. Scientists dismissed him. Priests misunderstood him. Merchants tried to buy whatever he'd seen. So he stopped talking. Instead, he started building on the edge of a crater where rain pooled like mirrors. He laid the foundation for a place he called Haven Echo. It wasn't much, just domes of clay and metal built by hand. He opened it to anyone who'd lost their way, anyone who'd grown tired of noise. The only rule was silence for the first hour of sunrise. Folks laughed at that until they came. One by one, wanderers arrived. Miners, farmers, scholars, and soldiers. People whose lives had been run dry by hurry. And when dawn came and the hum rolled through the valley, every one of them fell still. Tears came to he, laughter to others, it didn't matter. They heard the same thing, peace, patient, and alive. Word spread fast. Haven Echo grew, not into a city, but a circle of souls, learning how to breathe again. They planted gardens, waged machines once stood. They taught children to listen before speaking. They rebuilt not for profit, but for harmony. At the center of it each, Colm kept a single note humming through the halls, a tone he'd recorded from that spire. No one knew what frequency it was, but when it played, time itself seemed to slow. Lovers held hands longer. The sick found rest. The angry forgot their reasons. "It's not a song," Colm said once. "It's the space between songs." Before he died, he wrote one entry on a plain sheet of copper etched by hand. It read, "If you hear it, answer it. If you can't, be still until you can." They mounted that copper plate on the highest dome of Haven Echo. When storms came, lightning struck it, and instead of shattering, it sang. The sound echoed for miles low, endless, comforting. Travelers said you could hear it even when the valley was buried in fog. Some followed it for months, finding their way by vibration alone. It wasn't a refuge anymore. It was a compass. Centuries passed, and the hum became harder to trace, scattered by machines that drowned the silence. But every now and then, someone would rediscover it. A mechanic fixing a broken drone who paused and heard it buzz through the circuits. A child playing in dust who hummed without knowing why. A pilot lost between stars who felt it pulsing through the hull. Always there, always waiting. Some say Haven Echo still stands, though no one can agree on where. Others claim the hum frequency can only be heard by those whose hearts have known both greed and grace. Maybe that the test understanding what it means to have enough and to give back what the world lent you, maybe the hum ain't sounded out. Maybe it what remains when the noise of want finally fades away. Either way, every fire that burns beneath the night sky carries a piece of it. Every rainfall that calms a restless town hums with it. Every soul that pauses long enough to listen adds their own small note to the chord of forever. And when you add them up, the sighs, the songs, the quiet dreams, it sounds a lot like balance, a lot like peace, a lot The hum. Long after Haven Echo had vanished into legend, the hum found its way into the smallest places, the cracks between raindrops, the hollow of a wooden bowl, the tremble in a mother voice when she soothed her child to sleep. It wasn't loud or grand, never meant to be worshipped. It was just there, patient to dawn, reminding every living thing that no sound, no act, no kindness had truly disappeared. The hum had become part of life's very rhythm, unseen but unmistakable, like gravity or breath. In the quiet outskirts of a rebuilt earth, a man named Orr Pike lived alone beside an old river that once fed cities long turned to stone. He was not rich, not in the usual way, but he had enough. A small cabin, a field of rye, and a phantom porch light that burned through every storm. Folks in the nearby town thought him odd, a hermit, and said, but whenever anyone stopped by for water or shelter, Orr offered both with a grin and a story. You would hear the world hum, son, he'd ask, rocking slow in his chair. Most folk don't. Too busy, trying to be louder than life. Truth was, Orr had heard it. Not legend, not that rumor, but once clear of the bell of a church. When he was just a boy, he'd been trapped beneath rubble after the great flood of Meridian, water rushing in, timbers groaning, just as he thought it was over. A low sound filled the air, not from outside, but from within him. It steadied his heartbeat, calmed his panic, made him feel safe even while the world was raking. Hours later, rescuers pulled him out. The first thing he did after breathing fresh air was whisper, "It humming." They thought he'd lost his senses, but he never forgot. From that day forward, Orr made a promise to live in such a way that he could hear it again. He worked as a mason, a teacher, a repairman, never stand rich, never stand poor. He saved a portion of every coin he earned, not to hoard, but to mend bridges, barns, tools, and sometimes even hearts. When folks asked why he didn't charge more, he'd just say, "Ledger got a balance, friend. World gives, world takes, and we do our part in between." Over time, the people around him changed. Arguments quieted. Dealers helped without asking. Our markets ran fairer. It wasn't just of law or fear, it was the hum spreading bid through actions instead of sound. One autumn, a drought hit the valley. Crops failed, wells dried up, and tension crept in with smoke. Orr watched tight men who once shared bread began hoarding grain. The noise of want grew louder than the hum, drowning out patience, drowning out reason. So he did what he had, a handful of seeds, of tools, and the last of his savings, and ought a meeting under the old windmill. "You think the sky gone quiet," he told them, "but maybe it just waiting for us to listen first. The land ain't dead, it just tired, same as any of us. Let rest it, feed it, hum it back to life." They thought him foolish, but desperation has a way of opening ears. A dozen followed him, then 50, then near the whole town. They tilled by hand, carried water from the river, planted what they could, or hummed while he worked. Not a song, not a prayer, just a tone that rose and fell like breath. The children joined in, then the elders. Soon the valley itself seemed to vibrate. When rain finally came weeks later, it wasn't a storm. It was a whisper, soft and steady, soaking the soil like gratitude. The next season brought the fattest harvest in memory. From that day, every dawn began with silence, no bells, no sermons, just stillness. Then, when the sun broke the hills, one voice would start humming, joined by another, then dozens more, until the whole valley sang without words. They faded the quiet harvest, a ritual that lasted generations. Outsiders mocked it, called it superstition, but the valley never starved again. And the people, they never grew greedy. Their wealth was measured in calm hearts and steady hands, not in gold. When Orr grew old, he sat once more on his porch, staring out at the fields he'd helped restore. Children ran panned, laughing, carrying lanterns shaped at stars. He smiled, humming that same tone he'd heard as a boy. Before long, the night answered him. Not the wind, not the crickets, something deeper. The hum was there again, rolling through the earth, through the river, through his chest. He closed his eyes, and it felt that every story he'd been told was coming home at last. Well, he whispered, "Guess the ledger even." The next morning his chair was empty, still rocking in the breeze, but on the table beside it sat a single stone, smooth and carved with words so faint they could have been written by rain. Keep the balance, keep the hum. The townsfolk buried him by the river under a willow that bent low to the water. They said that at dusk, when the lanterns floated downstream, you could hear that hum again, faint but sure, as though the earth itself was thanking him. Years passed, the valley changed, but that little cabin remained. Travelers often stopped there for rest, and every one of them swore the same thing. The moment they sat on that porch, the noise of the world fell away, and for a breath or two, they could feel the hum again. And maybe that's how it always was meant to be, not in temples or cities or among kings, but in the quiet corners where life is simple and hearts are open.
Maybe the hum don't belong to history or science or faith. Maybe it belongs to whoever listened and whoever's still enough to hear it. In time, the quiet harvest faded from Roker, but never from memory. It drifted into myth, sung in the low tones of wanderers' songs or told around fires by those who'd lived long enough to see greed fall quiet for a while. Yet somewhere deep in the folds of the world, where the hum still slept beneath the skin of the land, it began to stir in. Like always, it taught to the kind of man who wasn't looking for it. That man was named Jericho Vale. He was no hero, no preacher, no saint, just a weather-editor trader running odd goods along the dust roads of the Western Reach. His hands were calloused from the weight of coin, and his heart had been traded too many times for comfort. He'd seen the rise and ruin of towns built on promises of silver and steam. He'd watched fortunes made and lost faster than storms.
And after years of chasing gold that never stayed, he'd grown hollow. Ain't nothing in this world that don't rust, he'd tell the barkeep, slipping another coin across the counter. But one night, he rode his wagon through a stretch of open plain. The rain came sudden, thick, heavy, like the sky was remembering something it hadn't said in a long while. He pulled off the road, pitched his tarp, and sat under it, staring at the water hissing against the coals. Then he heard a low, steady tone humming through the storm. Not thunder, not wind, something alive. He froze, feeling the ground vibrate under his boots. It was faint but deep, running through the mud, through his bones, all the way to his chest. The hum. He didn't know how he knew, but he did. Like a song he'd forgotten he'd once known by heart. He sat there till dawn, listening. When the rain stopped, the hum faded, but it left something behind, an ache, a direction. So Jericho packed his things, turned off the road, and followed it. No map, no sense, just instinct. For days he walked through valleys that hadn't seen footprints in decades.
Boys swallowed by vines, rivers cut deep, these scars. Finally he came to a canyon where the walls glowed faint blue at night, and then, carved into the stone, were marked circles and lines, the same kind that had once been found on the ledger of clay red. Inside the canyon was a cave, dry and wide as a chapel. In the center, a pool of water shimmered, though no light touched it. He knelt beside it, cup in his hands, and the surface began to ripple. Not from his touch, but from the sound. The hum again. It rose from below, soft but endless. The water vibrated with it, patterns of light dancing across the ceiling. Then, in the reflection, Jericho saw faces. Not ghosts, not visions, but echoes. Clay, Jonah, Eli, Nara, Maeve, Orr, all staring back with the same calm eyes. They didn't speak, but their presence filled him with understanding. Not words, not commands, just a truth that settled into his bones. The hum was never a song to hear, it was a way to live. He stayed there for days, maybe weeks. When he came out, his beard had grown white, and his eyes no longer carried the weight of gold.
He sold his wagon, gave away his goods, and built himself a small hut near the canyon mouth. Travelers passed him often, and when they did, he offered water, food, and silence. And my chair he'd say, "But the quiet free." Over time, people started staying. A farmer, a mother with her children, a scholar who'd grown tired of chasing theories. They built small homes, shared tools, worked side by side. The air was still, the ground fertile, the nights peaceful. Jericho never haunted a town, but others did. They named it Vale Rest. He didn't preach, didn't lead. He just lived the way the hum had shown him. Steady, kind, never taking more than he gave. As soon, the people followed suit. When someone quarreled, they'd walk to the canyon and sit by the pool until the ripples stilled. When a child was born, the townsfolk would hum together to sunrise, their voices low and soft like wind through pine. When death came, they buried the body by the river with hands in the soil. No words spoken, just that familiar vibration in their chests. Vale Rest prospered, not through trade or power, but through balance. Before he passed, Jericho wrote one thing on the inside of his hut door, just 4 words: "Leave it better, always." That became the town creed. Each generation carved it again when the old wood rotted, until the phrase was etched in stone. And even centuries later, when storms came and tore the huts apart, those 4 words were all that remained. No one knows what happened to Vale Rest. Some say it still exists, hidden in a canyon that no map can find. Others believe it gone, but its way of living survived, quiet, patient, spreading wherever a soul chooses kindness over hurry. They say that if you walk the plains on a still night, you can hear the faint ache of Jericho hum rolling through the wind like thunder too tired to rake. It not a call for worship or glory, it a reminder that in every age, every world, no matter how loud things get, there'll always be a man or woman or child who stops, breathes, listens, and brings the balance back. The hum don't die, it don't fade, it just waits for the next heartbeat that's brave enough to carry it forward.
You're listening close tonight, under a tin roof, or near a quiet creek, or maybe sitting by your own fire. You might yet feel it too. That low, patient tone humming through the dark, telling you what every story in this long ledger have meant to say. Don't rush, don't hoard. Don't rake what you can mend. The world keeps its own music, and all you gotta do is stay still enough to hear your part in it. And so it was that the hum found its home in stories, not stones. For every ledger burned, another was written in the hearts of those who lived by its rhythm. The world moved on, machines returned, cities roared, the sky filled once more with metal wings. Yet between all that noise, the hum endured like a quiet current under a wild river. You couldn't kill it because it wasn't built. You couldn't buy it because it wasn't sold. It lived only in the way a soul carried itself through a day. There was one last man who carried it still. His name was Amos Reed, an old rancher who ran cattle across the borderlands, that the wind never stopped singing.
Was the kind of man time forgot. Not rich, not poor, just steady. His boots were mended more than once, his hands lined like dry riverbeds. He'd lost plenty in his life. A wife to fever, sons to the road, friends to the years, but he never lost his calm. When the neighbors' tempers flared, when drought turned men bitter, Amos would dead nod slow and say, "Ain't no not cussing at the sky. It don't owe us nothing." Then he'd hum, real soft, like wind through grass. Folks thought it was habit or madness. But what they didn't know was that hum had been passed to him by his granddad at one of the last from Bell Rest. He told Amos when he was a boy, "Son, this world will try to make you louder than your old conscience. Don't let it. When it gear starts boiling, just listen. You'll hear the balance if you let yourself get quiet enough." And Amos had done just that all his life. Every choice he made, he waited till he could hear that quiet tone in his chest before deciding. Never round him once. One summer, a great fire swept through the borderlands. The whole herd scattered, towns burned to their bones, the sky turned to rust. Amos was old then, too old to run, too stubborn to flee. Instead, he saddled up and rode toward the flame line. Humming low, he went. He found a dozen men fighting to save what little they could. They shouted, panic, cursing the wind. Amos rode straight through him, no rush in him, no fear either. Don't fight the fire, he told them. Guided, they stared at him like he was crazy, but he showed digging trenches, letting the flame feed only way it needed, steering it instead of stopping it. The hum rode out of him, low and steady, keeping their hearts from breaking under the heat. When the smoke cleared, the town still stood, not untouched but alive. Afterward, the men asked him how he knew what to do. Amos just smiled and said, "Fire like greed, son. You don't win by yelling at it, you win by understanding its hunger." He stayed there a few more years, rebuilding the town, planting trees where ashes lay, teaching the young ones to listen to wind before it turned to storm.
Some called him a sage, others for quiet man. Didn't matter to him either way. He'd never been one for names. One day, long after his hair had gone white, had snow on salt, Amos sat on his porch and felt a shiver under the earth. Not from fear, something else. The hum was changing softer, slower, like a long sigh before rest. He knew then that his part of the song was nearing its end. He lit a lamp, wrote a few words on the back of a cattle receipt, and left it folded under a stone by his door. Then he leaned back, eyes half closed, humming one last time. As the stars came out, the tone stretched further than men before, across fields, through rivers, into towns that never knew his name. The next morning they found him sitting there, calm asleep, with a smile like a man who finally remembered something he'd been looking for his whole life. The paper under the stone said, "Don't try to own peace, just keep it moving." And so they did. His words spread like seed in wind. The town took up his hum of their calling. Every evening they'd stand out on the ridges, facing the sunset, and hum till the light faded. Travelers heard it from miles away, a low, gathering sound that felt older than language itself. Some joined in without knowing why. Some just stood and listened, hearts beating in time. The town was never wealthy, but no one of went hungry. No one of slept angry. And when storms came, not one roof fell, if the wind itself respected that harmony. Generations later, when machines ruled the plains again and men forgot the feel of soil in their hands, the hum still lingered there. You couldn't record it, devices would fail. You couldn't explain it, words fell short. But every once in a while, a wanderer would stop in that valley and swear that the air itself seemed to breathe with them, that even the silence had weight if the world was listening. Maybe that's what the hum had been after at. A lesson too simple for pride to grasp, that wealth ain't gold and peace ain't the absence of trouble. It's the patience to meet the world on even ground. To let life flow through you instead of trying to trap it in your hands. The hum wasn't a secret, it was a reminder. Passed from Clay Wren to Ora Pike to Jericho Vale to Amos Reed and likely beyond, each man joined a single note in a melody that never needed to end. And somewhere, out past the reach of all their graves, in the deep quiet of night when the rain hits 10 den right, you can still hear it. Faint, warm, unbroken, the hum, waiting for the next listener. Long after Amos Reed's name was worn smooth by time, the world changed once more. The plains grew strange again, full of lights that cut the dark and towers that reached where clouds used to roam free. The hum grew quiet. Not gone, just buried deep beneath the hum of engines and the chatter of endless connection. People had all the noise they could want, and none of the stillness they needed. But the hum had never been about want. It was patient. It knew the difference between silence and absence. And so, as it had always done, it waited. Centuries later, the earth belonged not to cowhands or kings, but to the architects of air and light builders of towers that mined data instead of ore, dreamers who stitched the sky with glass. In one of those towers lived a woman named Elsie Rowe, a historian of forgotten lives. Her job was to listen to what had been lost, not with ears, but with algorithms, searching for fragments of sound, whispers buried in old recordings, faint tones left in broken circuits. She was young but carried an old soul, the kind that felt grief for things she'd never seen. When others saw ruins, she saw roots. One stormy night, while working through her archives, Elsie found a corrupted file from the Borderlands Restoration Records. Year 24 Disley. The clip was barely a few seconds long, nothing but static at first. Then, through the hiss, a sound, low, steady, alive. It wasn't a machine frequency. It pulsed like breath. She slowed it down, filtered it, amplified it. And there it was, the hum, the same one that had carried through centuries of soil, stone, and memory. It filled her apartment like a heartbeat, soft but certain. For reasons she couldn't explain, it brought tears to her eyes. It felt like home she'd never had. She spent years chasing it, every old red she could find, every signal that sounded even close, she traced. What she uncovered wasn't science, it was legacy. Amos Reed, Jericho Vale, Ora Pike, Clay Wren, the same pattern over and over, different names, same current, a harmony that refused to die. Elsie realized the hum wasn't bound to time or place. It moved through whoever lived by its rhythm. It was a way of walking through the world, not talking over it. But the world around her had no patience for such thoughts. The corporations that funded her research wanted control. If it is signal, they said, it can be weaponized, monetized, amplified. They thought it the frequency of empathy, drew diagrams, made models, planned transmitters that could inspire mass compliance. Elsie saw the danger. The hum had never been meant to command. It was born from stillness, not dominance, but tried telling that to men who believed peace could be patented. So she ran, took what data she could, erased the rest, and vanished from the city. No one heard from her again, not for a long time. Years later, a small group of wanderers found her in the mountains near an abandoned observatory. She'd grown older, hair gay, eyes clear. They said she spent her days tending a garden and listening to the wind. When asked what she was doing there, she smiled. Keeping the balance, she said, just like they did. Then she took out a small wooden device, hand-carved, simple. When she turned the crank, a hum filled the air. Not recorded, not digital, real, the kind you could feel in your ribs. The travelers fell silent, tears streaming down faces they didn't understand. When it stopped, she told them, don't try to spread it, just live it. That's how it lasts. When Elsie passed, they buried her beneath the observatory dome, where the stars reflected off the polished floor like 1,000 watchful eyes. Her device was sealed beside her, crank-ack in place. But sometimes, when storms rolled through and lightning kissed the dome, the whole mountain would vibrate with that same low tone. Pilgrims came for centuries after, claiming they'd felt something there. Not religion, not magic, just peace. The kind of peace that doesn't come from being right, but from being still. Eventually, the observatory fell to ruin, and the mountain grew wild again. But the hum didn't stop. It slipped into rivers, soaked into roots, rose through the wind-lit pollen. It became what it had always been, the sound of life remembering itself. Children born in distant towns would sometimes hum in their sleep the same tone. Farmers would hear it in the soil before a good rain. Old folks would find it between their heartbeats right before passing on. It wasn't a miracle. It was a return. And so the hum lived on, not through machines, not through monuments, but through moments. A soft word in anger place, a shared meal in lean times, a hand on a shoulder when there's nothing left to say. These became its temples. Its preachers were anyone who chose kindness when cruelty was easier. Its scripture was silence, the kind that listens, not ignores. And though the stars themselves aged and shifted, the hum remained, same as it was. They say that in the final age, when the last cities fade and the sky grows quiet again, the hum will rise. One last time, not the ka, but that a welcome, a reminder that every act of patience, every moment of stillness, every breath taken in peace was never wasted. All of it, all along, was part of the same song, the same endless chord, the same balance humming through eternity. And then came the long quiet, the kind that stretched not for years or centuries but for eras. The hum had gone so deep into the bones of the world that it stopped needing listeners. It had become part of the soil, the pulse beneath mountains, the slow rolling sigh of the sea. The people that came after, whatever they were, didn't remember names like Clay Wren or Amos Reed. They didn't remember the ledgers, the fields, or even the sound of rain on tin. But the hum remembered them. It carried pieces of their choices, those patient, small acts of decency, folded into the rhythm of wind. It had been passed along so many lifetimes that it stopped belonging to anyone at. It just was. The world had taken shape by then. The sun burned softer, the oceans had moved inward, and what little remained of humankind lived high above the old lands in floating gardens built from glass and air. Among them was a girl named Neva, no older than 15, who tended to the roots of sky trees that hung beneath the platforms like emerald waterfalls. The air there was thin, and her world was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that frightened, but the kind that carried space. Every morning before the work began, she'd lean over the railing, eyes closed, listening to the low drone of the wind against the glass. Sometimes it almost sounded like a song, and though she didn't know why, she'd hum back to it. Her grandmother, old enough to remember the ground, once told her, "That sound you hear in the wind, that the world remembering us. Don't ever ignore it." And so Neva didn't. She carried that hum with her like a secret prayer. Keeping time with her heartbeat, she worked. One evening after a storm tore through the garden, she found something tangled in the roots, a small wooden box, worn smooth by age. She took it home, set it on her table, and saw a crank at its side. When she turned it, the air shimmered. Then the sound began, low, endless action and beautiful. The hum, it filled the small room like dawn filling a valley. Neva sat still to stone, tears spilling down her cheeks for reasons she couldn't name. Over the next week, she brought the box to the garden every day. When she played it, the trees leaned toward her. The fruit grew fuller, the colors richer. The hum soaked into the roots, then the branches, then the seeds. Before long, the entire garden began to glow faintly at dusk, each leaf vibrating with the same quiet tone. The overseers took notice. They thought that a miracle and wanted to replicate it, bottle it, sell it. But Neva refused to show them the box. She knew without words that the hum couldn't be owned. It wasn't made for profit, it was meant for peace. So she guarded it, humming each night as the sky darkened, teaching the younger ones to do the same. Years later, when she'd grown old and gay, her grandmother, Neva, wrote her final message in the Sky Garden Journal. She didn't write about machines or laws or science. She wrote about stillness, about how wealth wasn't measured in what was built, but in what was balanced. Her last line read, "When the hum moves through you, don't ask where it came from, just pass it on." The next morning she was gone, and the box was gone with her. But every time the wind passed through the trees, the hum returned, low, patient, eternal. The floating cities drifted for millennia after that. Civilizations rose and fell, languages changed, but the hum never needed translation. It became the rhythm of sleep, the cadence of rest, even in the farthest reaches of the stars. When travelers crossed the dark between worlds, they said their ships carried a faint vibration like a whisper from home. Some claimed it was the ship engine, others thought it imagination, but a few, the quiet ones, knew better. They'd close their eyes, breathe deep, and smile. "It's still here," they'd say. "We ain't alone in the silence." And when those ships landed on new worlds, when new seeds were planted and new skies stretched above, the hum went with them. Into the air, into the roots, into every heart patient enough to listen. It was never a religion, never a command, just a truth simple as rain. Life hums 'cause it must, and peace hums 'cause someone still remembers how. If you stood under those alien trees now 10,000 years past the first whisper, you'd hear it too. The same tone that once rolled through Clay Wren Valley, that once steadied Ore Pike Heart, that once rose from Jericho Vale Canyon, that once carried Amos Reed breath, that once echoed through Elsie Rowe Glass Tower, and now through Neva Sky Gardens. The same note, changed lays in kind. You wouldn't need to know the story to understand it. You'd just stand there, still, and feel it move through you. And maybe, if you're quiet enough, you'd hum back, because the hum was never a thing that ended. It wasn't born, it wasn't lost, it just changed hands, like all good things worth keeping. Long after Neva Sky Gardens had drifted into legend, the hum crossed the vastness of time once again, finding new soil in stranger lands. It traveled not to sound as time, but as pattern woven into the frequencies of stars, carried along solar winds of pollen. It drifted through the emptiness where no man's voice had echoed, reaching a place where light itself moved slower, gentler. There in a world of silver plains and rivers that glowed blue in the dark, a new kind of folk walked, a creature not born of flesh, but of via. They were called the Resonants. The Resonants had no mouths to speak nor ears to hear. They felt through vibration, communed through pulse. To them the universe was one great rhythm. Yet even among them there was a legend of a tone older than the stars, one that didn't command but balanced. They chatted the origin beat. It was said to be the first sound that split silence and the last that would remain when everything else was gone. Most believed it myth, until one day a resonant named Solon felt it, was a wanderer, drawn to the edges of things. While others thither near the radiant rivers to harvest lay, Solon roamed the quiet dunes, searching for the spaces between songs. He believed there was truth in what wasn't said. One twilight, ere the twin moons rose and the silver sand cooled, he heard, or rather felt, a pattern unlike any before. It was low, deep, carrying warmth in its wave. It didn't push or pull, it simply was. Yet in that stillness, Solon felt something awaken. He followed it across deserts and through valleys of crystal where echoes danced in eternal chorus. Each lace the hum grew stronger, not loud but clearer, until he reached a hollow canyon carved into the side of a mountain shaped like a heart turned to stone. There, nestled in the dust, was a relic, a tiny box, wood long turned to amber, yet still intact, and carved faintly upon its side a language none of the resonants could read, but which Solon somehow understood. Keep it moving. He turned the crank, though he didn't know why, and when the hum poured out, the whole canyon trembled, not in fear, but recognition. The sand lifted, the air thickened, and every resonant across the plains paused, feeling that ancient note vibrate through their cores. It was as if the world itself had remembered its first breath. They led there, hundreds, then thousands, human along in unison. No command, no leader, just balance. The tone spread through their world-lit dawn across horizon. For the first time in centuries, their kind stopped expanding, stopped conquering, stopped perfecting what was already whole. They began to listen. Fields of energy that once burned endless now pulsed in harmony. Crops grew stronger, storms softened their rage. Solon became the keeper, not of power but of pause. He taught peace ain't a silence without motion, it motion without violence. The resonants, in their wordlet way, understood. They lived by the hum, but balance always breeds envy in those who forget its cost. Far beyond their skies, a restless colony of machines, offspring of a long-forgotten human age, heard the hum and mistook it for weakness. They came to harvest it, to store it, to ooze it infinite energy. War came like thunder through clear skies. The resonants did not fight, they resonated. Their defense wasn't a weapon, but the hum itself. When the invaders descended, their systems faltered, their circuits shuddered. They couldn't comprehend the frequency. It wasn't destruction, it was remembrance. And in that remembrance, the machine saw every cruelty they'd have done reflected back at them. Some burned out from within, some stopped fighting and fell silent, and a few hummed back. Solon didn't live to see the end. He gave his form to the frequency, letting his body dissolve into pure resonance, feeding the hum with every ounce of memory he carried. When the war ended and peace returned, there was no monument built for him, just a still canyon, carved by sound instead of stone, humming every dusk when the moons rose. The resonants kept walking the balance, teaching their young that power ain't the voice that shouts the loudest, but the tone that stays steady when the storm comes. Eras rolled over them like tides. New worlds rose, others fell, and still the hum traveled on. Long after Solon kind faded into myth, a distant ship piloted by descendants of those old sky travelers found the resonant world. They heard the tone eating through the canyon and stood frozen, hearts racing with a familiarity they couldn't name. Some swore it was this wind through stone. But one old pilot sat down in the dust, closed his eyes and smiled. That the same song, he whispered, my grandma used to hum. No one understood him then. But centuries later, when they settled that world and built homes along its glowing rivers, they kept the tradition. Every night at twilight, they'd turn off their machines, stand outside, and hum. The tone grew softer with every generation, but it never vanished, because it never could. It wasn't a sound, it was a promise. A promise that even if the stars themselves went cold, peace would still find a way to speak. It would speak not through thunder, but through patience. 1,000 more seasons passed, and the hum wandered further still, stretching its reach beyond the cradle of worlds and into the empty gulf between stars. Out there, where light itself traveled slow at thought, it found no ear to catch it, no soil to rest upon, yet it didn't fade. It adapted. The hum began to take new form, dancing in waves of gravity, whispering across the fabric of space itself. For ages untold, it lay quiet, sleeping inside the pool of planets, hiding in the curve of moons, until one day, a voice woke it. A voice not born of breath, but of hearing. Her name was Ada Lorne, a lone explorer from a distant colony that circled a dying star. She was the last of her crew, drifting through dark space in a vessel powered by the final sparks of a fading sun. Her journey wasn't for conquest or profit, it was for understanding. She'd left her home after the final collapse of the Great Trade Federation, after greed had stripped her world of air and sky. She sought the first tone, a myth told in her childhood, a sound said to bring peace to even the most broken heart, a bedtime story most thought. But Ada had nothing left but the story, and in the silence of the void, even a story can become a map. Her ship was small, creaking like an old wagon in the wind. Supplies dwindled, oxygen thin. Still she pressed on, but when faint radio whispers she'd found in forgotten archives, ancient fractured signals describing a frequency of empathy, it led her toward a dead system, nothing but ash and rock. But as she drifted past the shattered remains of what might have once been a moon, she heard it, a vibration deep in the hull, faint to a heartbeat. It wasn't coming from outside, it was coming from within. At first she thought it was madness, isolation playing tricks on her mind, but when she pressed her palm to the console, she felt it steady, warm, patient. The hum, tears welled in her eyes before she knew why. She whispered, "I found you," and the hum answered, not with words, but with calm. Her breathing slowed. Fear ebbed. It was like being held by something ancient and kind. She didn't know how, but the ship seemed to respond, the engines flickering back to life, the lights glowing steady once more. For weeks she followed where the hum led. It guided her toward a nebula shaped like a spiral hand, its fingers stretching wide across the stars. At its heart was a sphere of crystal, larger than any planet she'd seen. Its surface shimmered with moving light, patterns shifting here like ripples in water. The hum grew stronger as she neared, until her whole ship vibrated with it. When she landed and stepped outside, she realized the airless void around the crystal wasn't silent, it was singing. The hum was everywhere, woven into light and motion. And then she saw them, not creatures, not machines, something in between. They were made of resonance itself, beings of tone and rhythm. They didn't speak, but she understood. The hum had carried her story to them and theirs to her. They showed her memories, not images, but feelings of Amos Reed, Clay Wren, Neva, Solon, all those who'd lived by the hum before. Every act of patience, every quiet kindness, every life that chose balance over dominion, they were all threads in the same song. Ada realized then that she wasn't hearing history. She was standing inside it. The hum wasn't a message sent through time. It was time, alive and unbroken. When she asked what it wanted of her, the beings pulsed gently, answering without sound. Nothing with feelings said, only that you remember, and in that instant she saw the truth of every wealth earned, every empire it built. They all fell because they mistook abundance for meaning. The real treasure had always been the hum, the small invisible thread of empathy that tied every living soul to Dell. She stayed there, in that crystal old place, For what might have been years or minutes, time moved different, remained harmony. When she finally returned to her ship, the beings gave her a fragment of the crystal, humming with quiet light. She carried it home, or what was left of it. Her planet had long gone cold, cities empty, seas turned to dust. But the sky was full of silence, waiting to be filled again. So she set the crystal on a mountain peak, turned her ship's speakers toward the stars, and let the hum sing once more. The tone carried through the vacuum, reaching other lost travelers, other broken worlds, and one by one they began to listen. They didn't rebuild the old ways, they built slower, smaller, truer. World's arrest wasn't weakness, and kindness wasn't currency. Adalorn became a myth herself, the last listener. They called her, some say she never died, that her voice became part of the frequency she released, traveling forever between the stars. Others say the hum carried her home to the same stillness that first birthed it. Either way, her gift endured. Every few centuries, a wanderer would report hearing a soft vibration in their bones, guiding them through darkness. Some awed it God, others told it love, but the truth was simpler. It was the hum, keeping the balance, same as it always had. And maybe, someday, when other noise is gone and the last spark of life hums its final tune, the universe will sigh and settle back into that perfect stillness. Not empty, not cold, just whole. The hum will fade back into silence, and silence will hum back. And the two will rest together, like old friend around a fire at the end of time. They say the hum still wanders out there, riding on waves older than memory itself. Not every soul hears it, mind you, when tongue to the hurried, nor to the ones chasing their own echoes through halls of glass and gold. It finds the patient, the drifters, the watchers, the quiet folk who sit alone by the fire when the rain won't quit. Maybe that why it came to old Merrill Cave. He weren't no hero, no legend, just a ranch hand on the edge of a forgotten desert, tending to machines that no longer had much reason to run. The world had gone near sailing by then. Not the good kind of quiet, but the kind born from too much hurry burning itself out. Cities had shrunk back into the earth. The air had grown clean again, but the laughter was thin. Folks spoke softer, not because they were peaceful, but because there wasn't much left worth raising their voice for. Merrill lived alone in a shack he built from scrap, sitting between dunes where the wind howled like ghosts. Remember names. Every evening he'd brew a little coffee on the stove, pull up a chair, and listen to the static on his old receiver. It hadn't caught a real broadcast in decades, but he liked the sound, and said it reminded him of time. Moving even if you might a beetle ride with your foot. One night that static changed. It dropped low and steady, emming like a cello underwater. Merrill leaned forward, his mug hovering mid-air. The sound grew clearer, carrying a rhythm so gentle it near broke his heart. He didn't know it, but the hum had found him. For hours he sat there, eyes closed, hands folded, listening vague. That low tone filled every corner of the shack. It weren't loud, just right, like it knew exactly how much space to take up. When the sound finally faded, he whispered, "I remember that," though he didn't rightly know why. The next morning, Merrill found himself humming back, a tune he couldn't place, something older than his years, flowing through him like blood. When the neighbors few they were heard it, they said their hearts eased. The air seemed lighter, the crops grew greener in the small garden he kept. Soon folks started visiting, sitting by his fire, sharing coffee in silence while Merrill hummed. They'd tell him they came because their dreams had gone too loud and they needed a quieter one to listen to. Merrill never claimed to know why his voice did what it did. He said the sound wasn't his. He was just a place it passed through. Word spread across the dry lands. People from the ridges and riverbeds started wandering to his shack, not for answers, but for stillness. They bought old instruments, bent guitars, half-busted fiddles, steel cans turned to drums, and began playing along with Merrill hum. At first it sounded rough, like a train rattling through dust, but then, one evening, the rhythm caught. The hum deepened, wove through every sound, every hand, every heart. It wasn't a song made, it was a song found, a song that'd been waiting for them to remember it. The folks stayed, built small huts on the old shack, tilled the soil that had long refused to bloom, and found it soft again. They called their settlement Stillwell, not for any man, but for the feeling. Stillness that wells up when you stop chasing noise. It grew slow and honest, like a seed sprouting from dust. They had no leaders, no flags, just the hum. Each dawn they'd gather round the central fire, close their eyes, and hum together. No words, no sermon. Just that deep, even tone carrying through the wind. Strangers arrived hungry and left healed, not from food, but from something gentler. The hum taught them to move slower, trade fair, listen longer. Years rolled by and Stillwell became more than a town. It became a rhythm. The hum seeped up into the soil again, into the roots of the few trees that managed to grow, into the bones of the people themselves. Babies were born humming in their sleep, and when the old passed on, their last breath left the same tone in the air. Merrill lived long enough to see it all. The quiet harvests, the laughter that didn't need reason, the peace that didn't need promise. And when his time came, he sat by his fire one last time, coffee in hand, humming soft into the dark. The wind picked up, carrying his tone across the dunes. By dawn, the whole valley was singing without a single voice. They buried him at sunrise, no stone, no speech, just the hum rolling through the desert like thunder in slow motion. Stillwell didn't die after him. It flourished. Not in riches or numbers, but in balance. Travelers came from far-off colonies, bringing bits of the hum back to their worlds. Slowly, gently, the tone spread once more. It wound its way through wind turbines, through ocean waves, through the circuitry of distant machines. Everywhere it went, it calmed what was restless, steadied what was lost. And in time, when the last sparks of mankind flickered low, when stars themselves began to dim, the hum remained. Not in sound, but that a memory of sound. The same quiet thread that tied Merrill Shack to Neva Gardens, Solon Canyon, Ada Crystal, Clay Wren Fields, and the way back to the first breath that dared to hum instead of shout. No monument marked its journey. It didn't need one. Every moment of grace, every choice toward patience, every sigh of understanding, that was its monument. If you sit quiet tonight, real quiet, and let the rain tap against your window or the wind press through the cracks, you might just hear it. Not loud, not insistent, just there. The hum, traveling still. A whisper saying, you don't have to rush, you just have to listen. Long after Stillwell fires dimmed to embers, the hum kept moving slow, patient, unbothered by the rise and fall of things. You see, history has a way of burning itself down, only to grow back softer, wiser, like prairie grass after a storm. The hum didn't fight that truth. It breathed with it. It wound through the ruins of forgotten cities where steel bones jutted from sand through crumbled domes of glass that once tried to touch heaven, through the gears of machines half buried and rusted, still whispering the last words of their makers. The hum tucked at it, mending not the metal, but the memory. One day, far across the red horizon, a child named Leo was born beneath a sky that had learned to glow dimly again. His people lived simple, no engines, no circuits, just hands, earth, and the patience to listen. But Leo was different. He'd sit by the river, head tilted, saying he could hear things others couldn't. The wind, the water, even the soil, all humming, all connected. The elder smiled, thinking it was imagination. But one dusk, when the storms rolled in from the west and the lightning cut the clouds, he began to hum back. It wasn't a tune he learned. It came out of him with breath after holding it too long, deep, steady, ancient. The river stilled. The thunder softened. The rain hit the ground in rhythm, not chaos, and when it ended, the crops that had been dry for months began sprouting overnight. The elders called it miracle, but Leo the altered said, I only gave it back what it gave me. From that day on, the people listened. They learned to hum through him, each note a different kind of balance. One for the fields, one for the heart, one for forgiveness. Leo didn't preach. He just walked from place to place, teaching folks to hear what they'd forgotten. The patience beneath noise, the music inside work. His legend grew, not in stories of power, but in silence kept between breaths, generating past. Leo's voice became myth, but his lessons took root. People began building wind temples, great hollow towers that sang when the breeze moved through them. They placed them across the plains, along coastlines, on mountaintops. When storms came, the towers hummed together in harmony, keeping the balance between fury and calm. The sound became the heartbeat of the world, soft, steady, unownable. Centuries later, when the scholars of the New Age began exploring those towers, they called it natural resonance engineering. They thought they'd discovered something new: energy flow without conflict, power drawn from alignment instead of domination. Die Mädchen die Weibel geloof vermeulen en je show nation is like giving. It's thunder from the underdogs, but those who stayed long enough, those who stood under the arches when the wind was right, swore they could hear a voice in the hum, a voice that sounded old, weathered, kind. They said it told stories about a man who carried clay and patience through dry seasons, a woman who turned wind into garden, a traveler who found tone in silence, a cowboy who hummed by his fire while the world healed itself around him. Some dismissed it in hallucination, others taught it divinity, but a few, the quiet ones, just smiled. They'd heard it too. As civilization rebuilt, the hum became a principle, not worshipped, but respected. Cities were designed around silence, homes made to breathe instead of suffocate. People worked in rhythm, spoke in calm. There were no banks, no ledgers, just trusts kept by honor and memory. Every exchange began and ended with a hum, a shared breath between souls. It was the utopia. They still had arguments, still had pain, but even in their grief they hummed, and grief met with harmony. Didn't fester, it softened.
Long were the gives or prudent it was forward funny man.
But those who stayed long enough, those who stood under the arches when the wind was right, swore they could hear a voice in the hum, a voice that sounded old, weathered, or kind you toward your dreams. Rest now. One winter, long after the world had balanced itself once more, a group of children found an old relic buried under frost near what used to be Stillwell. It was small, wood turned dark and smooth with age, a box with a crank. They brought it to their elder, an old woman named Mara, who kept the records of stories. When she saw it, her hands trembled. Without a word, she turned the crank. The hum spilled out, low and warm at a hearth after dusk. The children went quiet. The snow seemed to slow midair. The whole valley, for a heartbeat, remembered. Mara smiled through tears. He's still singing, she whispered. Play Amos, Ada, all of them. She set the box by the fire that night, letting it play until dawn. The sound rolled out through the valley, carried on wind that smelled like sage and ash, drifting across the plains. And somewhere, far away, where no one lived and no one listened, the hum reached a canyon that hadn't sung in ages. The walls began to vibrate. The dust rose like breath, the resonance deepened, calling across the stars. And once again it found new soil, wherever patience lingered, wherever kindness refused to die. That the way of the hum, it don't vanish, it waits. It waits for the quiet hearts, the small fires, the hands that work without anger. It waits for those who build not to own but to tend. The hum has no end cause it ain't meant to. It a circle, a rhythm older than sin, newer than forgiveness. It the breath between what was and what yet to come. If you're sitting there tonight, rain tapping the roof, maybe the world weighing heavy on your chest, you don't need much to find it. Just slow down, let your breath match the wind out. Let the sound of your own heartbeat find its pace, then listen. Not for words, not for signs, but for that low, steady tone that been humming since the first dawn. It don't matter what name you give it. God, grace, balance, luck, it all the same that the world remembering itself through you. That the secret the hum keeps whispering, you ain't small. You're part of the song. And as long as you keep humming, the world keeps spinning.
Higgins stamt dat sombra. Onen alt op het oude John. Ja, dan pressen je de wat weer. In nee, ik meld op ook dan. Als wat ik zeg net dat ik hier nu hen schaf. Want ik kan doen het. Dat is een life. Maar ik voel schaffen bij dat. Een familie. Oh, stop. Morgen the years after tomorrow time, the hum found its way to a place no one thought it would. The deep wetlands beneath the Silver Range leaves men dug for stones that no longer had what's worth, but still carried the memory of wealth. Down there, miles on the rock in silence, worked a fellow named Jeb Carden. He was the last of the old hands, scarred, quiet, too stubborn to quit though the world about him. Long stopped paying him in to dig. They said he stayed because he liked the dark. Truth was, he stayed because he didn't know what to do with the quiet once he got topside. Every day was the same wake before dawn, light the lantern, descend into the earth. The walls groaned, the air smelled like rust and ghosts. Jeb didn't mind. He'd hum to himself while he worked, a low broken thing that kept his heartbeat company. One morning, as he chipped away at a seam of dull ore, his pick struck something that sang. Not metal, not stone, something else.
His sound rang out pure and long, like a bell underwater. It rattled his bones, stopped his breath. For a moment, he thought it was his own hum echoing back. But the tone didn't stop. It grew. slow, steady, patient. The whole mine started vibrating with it, dust falling to snow and lamplight. Jeb dropped his pick and listened. It wasn't a sound from outside, it was coming from the earth itself. He knelt, pressed his ear to the stone, and heard it, an old song, deep and familiar, drifting up through the layers of time. He didn't understand the words, because there weren't any. It was just a hum, but it filled him with a warmth he hadn't felt in decades. He sat there, tears cutting tracks through coal dust, and let it wash over him. When he rose again, something inside him had changed. He didn't see the mine as dead anymore. He saw it breathing. From that day on, Jeb stopped digging. He started carving with slow, deliberate hands. He turned the tunnels into hollow chambers, cutting wide arches and narrow grooves so the hum could travel through him. It's similar feud on the lad. Folks thought he'd gone mad, spending years shaping empty stone instead of pulling wealth from it. But when they went down to fetch him one winter, what they found took their breath away. The entire mine had become a cathedral. The air shimmered with resonance. Every step, every whisper, every sigh turned to music. Jeb was sitting cross-legged in the center, eyes closed, humming along. "And a mine no more," he said, his voice soft to wind. It a throat for the earth. People started coming from far and wide to hear it, not out of greed, but reverence. They held it the Underheimer. When the world above grew loud again, machines, trade, chatter, it was said you could go down to Jeb Cathedral, sit in the dark, and remember what quiet felt like. No one would found where the hum in the stone came from. Some said it was the bones of the world singing back to itself. Others said Jeb had just carved deep enough to find what the hum had been hiding all along. Either way, it became a place of pilgrimage, not for saints or kings, but for anyone who'd forgotten how to breathe slow. Peg is so pummeled on the call. As the ages passed, the Underham became legend. Bubba, cities rose again, quiet ones, built in harmony with the wind and stone. They didn't pave over the desert this time. They built and death, leaving gaps for sound to move through. Every tower was tuned like an instrument. Every home had an open vent to let the hum roll in. The people learned to measure wealth not by gold, but by how long they could stay still and listen. In that stillness, the hum grew stronger. Some nights, it'd climb out of the earth, drifting across the plains like fog. If you stood far enough away, it sounded like 1,000 voices breathing in unison. They say in those years, peace wasn't written into law. It was hummed into being. Disputes ended with silence instead of argument. Trade happened by mutual nods, sealed with shared tone. Even the children learned the rhythm before they learned words. They taught it the balanced tongue of art, language made not of speech, but of resonance. And though no one could trace where it began, they knew the story. A miner, a traveler, a gardener, a cowboy, all part of one long melody stretching through centuries. And when Jeb finally passed alone, he preferred it wasn't sorrow. He was found sitting by the stone heart of his cathedral, hand pressed against the wall, mouth still humming. The sound didn't stop when his breath did. The walls kept singing, steady up. They still do. If you go deep enough, you can't take light with you down there. It drowns in the sound. But if you listen right, you'll hear it plain and sunrise, that same old hum that carried through generations, changing form but never losing truth. Maybe that the lesson the hum been teaching since the start, that no one owns it and no one unwill. It ain't a thing to keep, it's a thing to pass on. Each life, each act of quiet, each gentle choice adds a note to it. The song don't need a singer, it needs a listener, and every listener becomes part of the tune. So if someday you find yourself wandering through the dust, heart heavy and pockets empty, and the wind starts to carry that low sound again, don't go looking for its source. Sit, let it fill your chest. Maybe humming through your bones till the world don't feel so sharp anymore, because that hum had been humming for you longer than you've been alive, and it'll keep on humming long after you're gone. That the deal. The world gives you the song, and then it asks in return is that you keep it steady while you're here. A long stretch of years passed where anyone dared wander that far into the canyons again. The hum had quieted to a murmur, traveling more in memory than in sound, yet every now and then, when the moon hung low and the wind slipped through the cracks just right, you could hear the echo of Jeb Cathedral whispering through the stone like a lullaby that refused to end. Most thought they'd gone, but there were always a few who felt it call. One of them was a young woman named Nora Wren, descendant of Clay. Though she didn't know it, folks said her family line carried an odd calm about him, the kind that made even wild horses lower their heads. Nora grew up in the basin towns with Sand Net River, where trade was honest and time slow. She wasn't one for chatter. She'd mend nets by the docks while others argued over salt prices, never raising her voice once. The other fisherfolk used to tease her, calling her the quiet tide. She'd just smile, humming soft to herself. The nets danced in her hands. One autumn when the river dried sudden and fish vanished, folks panicked. Crops wilted, tempers flared. Traders threatened to leave. Nora said nothing. She walked upriver alone, following the dead stream through the ravine. For 3 days she vanished into the dust, and when she came back her clothes were torn and her boots near melted from the rock, but the river flowed again by nightfall. No one knew what she'd done, and she didn't explain. But when old Mara records were uncovered years later, they found drawings, lines of wind patterns, notes about tone through canyon walls, diagrams of something she called the earth throat. Scholars realized Nora had followed the hum upstream, finding way it whispered through fractures deep below. They said she must have hummed back to it, balance and pressure, opening pathways, coaxing water where it had gone dry. The people called it miracle. Nora just called it listen. After that, she became a wanderer. She left the basin, traveling across dunes, through overgrown highways, past towers half buried in time. Wherever she went, the hum grew a little louder. Some said she could feel it under her feet, humming through the soles of her boots. Villagers began inviting her to stay when drought or discord hit. She'd spend a night or two humming by their hearths, teaching them to slow down and breathe with the world in. By the time she moved on, the soil always softened, the air cleared, and peace returned quietly, without speeches or trade. She never asked for coin or thanks. If it stays quiet, she'd say, that payment enough. Years rolled on, and Nora legend grew until she wasn't a woman anymore in stories. She was wind, water, the hum itself made flesh. But she was still flesh, still mortal, still wandering. In her final winter, she came across a camp of merchants stranded by a blizzard. They'd lost their mules, their tents collapsed, and hunger had set in. Nora shared what little she had, built him a shelter from scrap wood, then sat by the fire, humming low as the storm howled outside.
Higgins of a tow from the town. Sound carried through the snow, and by dawn, the winds had stilled. The merchants swore they saw light shimmering and the flakes moving to her tone like dancers unseen. When morning broke, the path ahead was clear. They turned to thank her, but Nora was gone. Only her coat remained, hanging on a branch, humming faintly in the wind. The travelers carried that coat home, building a shrine round it, a simple wood post where anyone could sit, breathe, and hum their burdens out. Over time, the shrine grew. Pilgrims from every land came to see it. They carried out the quiet post. No prayers, no priests, just stillness. They said if you sat long enough, you could feel Nora humming beneath the ground, that if she'd melted into the earth itself, still helping rivers find their way, still easing hearts back to balance. Centuries drifted by, and civilization turned another page. Great steel ships crossed the sky again, humming not from greed, but from grace. Their engines were tuned to resonance patterns derived from the hum machines built not to conquer, but to align. Cities floated in calm air currents, powered by tone rather than fuel.
Children were taught equations first, but rhythm, the wave frequency made peace between opposites. The hum had become both science and spirit, and yet with old things, progress began to outpace patience once more. A new generation rose, eager to push the hum further, to bottle it, amplify it, make it serve rather than guide. They built massive amplifiers deep in the ocean, pulling sound straight from the planet cold. At first it worked, cities glowed brighter, ships flew farther. But then something shifted. The hum grew erratic, trembling between frequencies like a heart straining too fought. Rivers reversed. Birds flew in silence. The air thickened. Scientists couldn't explain it. The elders just said, you can't own what meant to be shared. Panic spread, but one woman, a descendant of Nora Name, remembered the stories. She shut down her machines, climbed to the highest peak, and listened. For 3 days, she sat in the cold, not speaking, not moving, until the hum returned to its natural rhythm. She came down with frostbit hands and calm eyes. It alive, she told him, and it don't need us to sing for it anymore. It's singing through everything. That was when people remembered Hayes.
The onrefstrained view lies Freyham. Freyham, ja, het blijft een anthem of wires, hopefully. A suddenly connect came.
From then on, the hum wasn't studied or worshipped, it was lived. Folks learned to hum while working, while mending, while mourning. They passed the sound down like family heirlooms, tunes that never ended. Duck changed hands, and those centuries passed. Those stars shifted and lands turned strange again. The hum endured in firelight, in rain, in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Maybe that the truest kind of wealth, the kind you can't hoard, can't buy, can't lose, the kind that carries on long after your name's gone. through the breath of those who learned peace from your silence. Nor a hum became that kind of wealth. Clay too, and there are those before him who listened instead of speaking. That the inheritance of the quiet, the kind that never rusts. They say in the years that followed the quiet post-rise, people started living slower again, not cause they were forced to, but cause they finally remembered what hurry had cost them. Towns sprouted like seeds round the old places, where hums still lingered. You could tell which ones were honest by the way their streets sounded at dawn, soft footfalls, slow carts, wind moving through slats of timber like a whisper instead of a scream. No horns, no shouts, no smoke belching out of chimneys to choke the horizon. Just stillness. The kind of stillness that ain't empty, it full. Full of thought, of patience, of the quiet gratitude that comes when a person don't owe the world anything but their presence. At the center of one such town stood a structure built of polished river stone and ironwood, tall and curved, like a seeing ear listening to the horizon. The folks taught it the Hall of Return. It wasn't a temple nor a courthouse, more like a place for reckoning. When a person wronged another, they didn't shout, didn't fight. They'd come to the hall, sit opposite one another in the open chamber, and hum. Sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours. The tones would bend and waver, clash and resolve, and when they found the same note, when the hums met in balance, that was forgiveness. No one decided it, the sound did. That how the town kept peace? By letting the air judge what the tongue could twist. But not hearts took to peace easy. There were still men who'd rather command than listen, still those who saw quiet aid's weakness. One of them was a trader named Cass Morrow, a man too clever for his own good. Cass was born poor and made rich by learning how to manipulate tone machines that kept ships aloft. He discovered that if he changed the hum pattern meant so, he could make engines yield more power for less harmony. The cities loved it, more speed, more glow, more growth. They'd made him a genius. But the older folk felt it an unease underfoot, a tension in the air like a string stretched too tight. The hum was starting to fight back. Cass didn't listen. He built a tower higher than any before it, a column of bronze and sound stone meant to perfect the hum, he said. No more randomness, no more mystery. We'll shape it to our will. On the day of the tower completion, thousands there to watch. Cass stood atop it, hand on the control disc, boasting about man dominion over nature song. But when he turned the dial, what came out wasn't music. It was a scream. The air cracked open. The earth trembled. Birds fell dead mid-flight. The tone spiraled out of control, bending matter itself, windows shattering, metal weeping, rivers turning to glass, and then silence. Thick in death, not peace, absence. The hum had gone still. People covered their ears, realizing the world sounded drawn, too empty. Cass disappeared in that moment. Some said vaporized, others claimed the hum took him, swallowed him whole into its deeper layers. Either way, he was gone, and the tower crumbled into dust. For years after, no one dared rebuild. The air stayed brittle, crops grew strange, animals stopped singing. Humanity learned a hard truth that day. When you force the song, it stops listening. It took generations for the hum to heal. Folks learned to whisper red, to tread soft. The old ways returned, craft over conquest, rhythm over rule. But the memory of Cass lingered, a caution passed down like a scar. And somewhere deep underground, in the cracks where the hum once hid, I swore they could still hear his voice echoing, a tone off by a fraction, mournful and proud, trying forever to tune itself back into the world. Then came the rebuilders, the quiet engineers, the stonemasons who worked not for wealth but for balance. They walked the old routes with tuning forks and hollow bones, listening to fare the earth was ready to sing again. Each time they found a spot that resonated, they'd build a small ring of stone and wood around it, a hum well they'd ate it. Folks would come by at dusk, sit in the circle, and hum together. The wells didn't give power, didn't grant riches, but they centered people. You could step in full of anger and step out steady as dawn. Over time, the hum wells became the heart of every settlement. Travelers could find them anywhere on the map, rings shimmering under moonlight, faint tones breathing through the wind. Even ships passing overhead would dip lower when they heard one, their hulls vibrating gentle in salute. The hum was alive again, not commanded, not feared, that honored. And so it was that when the last of the rebuilders, an old man named Tevran, felt his years waning, he didn't pass his work to apprentices. He passed it to the hum itself. Walked into the desert one twilight, humming the first note and carved, the one Clay Wren had carried through storm and solitude long before time had names. Folks searched for him when he didn't return, but all they found was a stone ring half buried in sand, humming faint and low. Inside the ring lay his boots, his hat, and a small note etched into the stone. Keep it steady, it don't belong to me no more. That was the last of the builders and the first of the keepers, the ones who simply listened. The hum didn't fade after Tevran. It spread through air, through blood, through thought, and maybe that's what balance, Lil, is. Not a state you reach, but a rhythm you hold while everything else keeps changing. The hum don't demand perfection. It just asks you to stay in tune. That what Clay knew. That what Ada and Jeb and Nora Al learned in their own way. And that what every soul since has had to remember. The song ain't yours alone, it everyone to keep alive. But if you're sitting, baby, by the faint crackle of a fire or the low patter of rain, don't rush to speak. Just breathe. You're part of it now. The hum inside you too, waiting for your stillness, not your noise. It patient, old to dirt, and it'll wait as long as it takes, 'cause the hum ain't going anywhere. It home. There came a time, long after Tevran boots turned to dust, when hums were no longer something men searched for. They were something men were born with. Babies came into the world already cooing in tune with the wind. Healers could set broken bones by finding a body frequency and humming it back into place. Builders didn't draw plans, they listened to what the earth wanted and shaped their work around its rhythm. The hum was not just a sound anymore, it had become a kind of wisdom, passed through generations the way blood carries memory. But paired with other things that last too long, the memory of how it started began to fade. The young ones didn't speak the names of Clay, Ada, Jeb, or Nora anymore. They thought the hum had always been there, at air or rain. History grew soft at the edges, a parchment left too long in the sun, and in that forgetting, a quiet danger stirred, not greed this time, but neglect. They didn't fight the hum, they just stopped paying attention to it, and neglect in the hum world is the same as noise. In a coastal city on Siri, where waves had been calm for centuries, the water started moving strange. The tides rose when they shouldn't, humming out of rhythm with the land. Fish fled the harbors, leaving empty nets and restless hearts behind. At first, folks blamed weather, blamed currents, blamed chance, but an old woman, blind and near forgotten by her kin, sat by the dock one dusk and said, "It not the water that lost, it you. You've forgotten the tone." She took a small bowl, filled it with seawater, and began to hum, low, steady, broken like wind through reeds. The ripples slowed, the bowl stilled. For a moment, the air thickened like it was listening. Then faintly, from the horizon, came an answer, deep, resonant, sorrowful. The sea itself hummed back. The people stood silent, watching the waves flatten to calm and moonlight touch the surface. The old woman smiled. "You can't lose the hum," she said, "but you can forget to listen." Word of her act spread fast. Soon, across the lands, people began listening again, not out of fear, but gratitude. The hum wells that had been left to gather dust were cleared and repaired. The Hall of Return reopened its doors. The world slowed its rush once more. But it wasn't the same kind of slowness as before. It wasn't recovery this time. It was remembrance. The difference between a man resting and a man understanding why he rests. There was one fella, though, a traveler named Eben Holt, who carried the hum in a way that was rare, even for those days. He was a cartographer of sound, drawing maps not of places, but of tones. He'd travel from one end of the continent to the other, collecting the pitches of wind, the resonance of canyon, the hum of forgotten machines half swallowed by moss. His maps didn't look like much to most spirals, swirls, dots connected by thin gold lines, but to him, they were records of harmony itself. Everywhere hums, he'd say. Some places says hum louder than others. Eben journey took him deep into the wastes of Nemea, a land long avoided, said to be where the hum went wrong centuries before. No birds sang there, no trees grew, just dunes and stone. Silent Anne held breath, but Eben had heard stories of a tone buried under the silence, a hum so deep it could wake the bones of the world. He walked for weeks, bowing the fainted pulse underfoot, until one night, when the stars were sharp and the air too still, he found a canyon split clean down the middle like the earth had been cracked open by a note too loud to bear. He descended carefully, humming low to keep the air from stilling too much. The deeper he went, the colder it grew, until finally he reached the bottom, and there, half buried in grassy sand, was a stone chamber. Its walls shimmered faintly, pulsing with the faint glow of dormant tone veins. At the center sat a machine, not like the old-world crude steel contraptions, but smooth, shaped from one thin piece of dark crystal, humming soft of breath through a flute. On its surface, carved deep, was a phrase worn almost smooth by time. "Keep it steady, it don't belong to me no more." Tevern words, even knelt, heart hammer. He placed his hand on the stone, and the hum surged through him. Ancient, endless, alive. He saw it at once. The long thread stretching through time, from Clay calloused hands to Nora River songs, from Jeb Cathedral to Tevern Ring, every life, every choice, every whisper, it was all one unbroken note, shift in pitch but never losing purpose. The hum wasn't just a sound, it was a record of every act of patience, every moment of balance mankind had known. And Aben listened, he realized something else wasn't done yet. The hum was still to come. He spent the rest of his life tending that chamber, not guarding it like treasure, but listening to it, learning from it. Travelers who passed through Nemea said if you stopped by the canyon on a quiet night, you could hear two hums instead of one, the low pulse of the earth, and a softer one above it, like an singing harmony. That was Ebang. His map was never found, but maybe it didn't need to be. Some said he became the map, his body melted into the hum, his voice turned to wind that carried its tone wherever silence dead. And so the story stretched on, not in words, but in resonance. From cowboy firesides to wind temples, from silent deserts to humming seas, the song continued, shaping itself into whoever had the patience to hear it. The hum outlived war, time, pride, even memory itself. It may be that the talk. It don't need to be remembered. It just needs to be felt. So tonight, if you sit under a low sky and the rain tapping slow against your window, listen close. Somewhere beneath the sound, past the thunder and the sighs, there a note waiting steady of breath, warm and embers. You might not hear it right away, but if you do, and it hums back to you, you'll know. The world's still singing, and it's singing for you to keep it steady. They're a kind of peace that don't shout, don't announce itself with trumpets or banners. It just arrives soft caressed dust settling on old leather. That the peace the world knew in the age after Ibn. The hum had become so inwoven with life that no one questioned it anymore. It was in the sway of trees, in the way the tides breathe, even in the pause between heartbeats. People didn't speak of balance like it was something to chase. It was just the way of things. Children were raised to understand that silence was the sacred ad sound, and that every note meant nothing without the space between. But our peace, no matter that gentle, carries a shadow of forgetting. The longer things stayed good, the less folks felt the need to remember why. The hum, once lived by gospel, began to fade into background again. Not from arrogance this time, just comfort. And comfort a sly kind of rust. It don't squeeze when it takes hold, it just spreads quiet. Inevitable. There was a young man named Rion Vale who grew restless in that quiet world. Was born in a valley where the air itself sang, where crops grew fat from the rhythm of the soil. But he saw no challenge in it. We hum, he'd say, and the world hums back. Fine. But what the point if nothing changes? Rion was sharp, clever with his hands, and quicker with his doubts. He studied the old tales. The ledger of Clay Wren, the wind gardener, the miner, the wanderer. He didn't mock him, but he didn't worship him either. He wanted to understand what made their hum different from his own. He left home one dawn with nothing but a sachich and a question. What happens when the hum stops answering? Folks tried to warn him, told him there was no outside the hum anymore, that he'd find nothing but stillness and dust. But he went anyway. Walked out into the empty reaches where no tone lived, where even wind seemed afraid to pass. Days turned to weeks. He found silence so thick it pressed on his chest, making him doubt he'd hear Rien. Yet in that silence something began to stir. Not outside him, but inside. Baby, delete pain away. And I didn't run for his hand. He had temptations for boy. Anything about the time pulled himself for it. But you don't like that. Man, you can't have a battle in the black and the shiny rebel. This time, why? So this was that listen, and at the mirror, it threw his arm back at him, twisted, challenged, reshaped.
He started to write these patterns down. Not dead music, but the math intervals of stillness, measures of space between tones. He realized that every gap had its own kind of song. The hum wasn't just the sound itself, but the memory of what came before and after. He stayed out there near a decade, learning from the silence. When he returned, he wasn't the same. His voice was deeper, his eyes clearer. He spoke slow, but each word weighed something real. He told the scholars of Sea Rate that they'd only been hearing half the truth all this time. We thought the hum was the song, he said, but the real song lives in what the hum leaves unspoken. They didn't understand at first. Rion built something to show him, a chamber made of dark glass and soundstone, where the air was tuned to cancel out every known frequency. He thought to keep saying, and in the L of his own voice, he began to hear variations, tiny shifts. I had the world answer in a language too faint for words. The silence wasn't dead, it was listening, and like a mirror, it threw his hum back at him, twisted, challenged, reshaped. He started to write these patterns down, not dead music, but the math, intervals of stillness, measures of space between tones. He realized that every gap had its own kind of song. The hum wasn't just the sound itself, but the memory of what came before and after. He stayed out there near a decade, learning from the silence. When he returned, he wasn't the same. His voice was deeper, his eyes clearer. He spoke slow, but each word weighed something real. He told the scholars of Sea Rate that they'd only been hearing half the truth all this time. We thought the hum was song, he said, but the real song lives in what the hum leaves unspoken. They didn't understand at first, so Rion built something to show them. The chamber made of dark glass and soundstone, where the air was tuned to cancel out every known frequency. He stayed on there near a decade, learning from the silence. When he returned, he wasn't the same. His voice was deeper, his eyes clearer. He spoke slow, but each word weighed something real. He told the scholars of Sea Rate that they'd only been hearing half the truth all this time. We thought the hum was song, he said, but the real song lives in what the hum leaves unspoken. They didn't understand at first, so Rion built something to show them. A chamber made of dark glass and soundstone, where the air was tuned to cancel out every known frequency.
Called it the Void Room. When you stepped inside, all hums vanished. Not even your own breath made a sound. The scholars laughed at first, saying it was just emptiness. But after a few moments in that silence, the laughter died. You could feel your own pulse elk through your bones, your heartbeat singing against your ribs. Then, faint tamed on, a low tone began to rise, not from walls or air, but from within. It was the hum reborn, not then memory, not that inheritance, but a truth. The silence had turned into music again, just by listening. That day, Rion changed the way folks thought about sound forever. The hum wasn't a thing to preserve anymore. It was a thing to rediscover over and over through each silence. Cities began building void halls in their centers, places where anyone could go to lose those sounds, to meet the hum anew when they left. Farmers would enter before planting season to clear their minds. Craftsmen before taking up who work. The hum had become a cycle. Now sound, silence, sound again. The world breathed in harmony. But Rion didn't stop there. He believed the hum wasn't just the Earth's song. It was the universe. Studied stars, watching fire they pulsed, how their light flickered in rhythm, and he began charting their music too. Each star had a tone, each galaxy a chord. The hum don't end, there he told his students. It stretches through all that is and on that'll be. When he died, he was buried not in soil, but in orbit. His body sealed in a silver pod that spun slow among the constellan. And they say, if you listen on a still night, you could hear a faint tone drifting from the heavens, soft and sure that old cowboy song humming against the firelight. Generating later, Rion discovery became the foundation of a new age and era of quiet expansion. People built ships that traveled through stars guided not by maps but by sound. They followed frequencies through dark matter like sailors follow currents. The hum had gone cosmic, no longer just the breath of the world, but the heartbeat of creation itself. And yet, through all that distance, one truth never changed. The tone stayed steady, slow, patient, kind. It never rushed, never shouted, never broke its own rhythm. Like the first hum Clay Wren once hummed to himself under a desert moon, it kept the same old pace. So may that what this whole story been trying to say since the start, that everything, from stars to soil to soul, is just trying to stay in tune. And when you fall out of rhythm, the world don't end, it just waits. waits for you to listen in, to hum soft, keep it steady, the same way it been humming since the first dawn, and the same way it'll hum long after the last fire goes cold. Some say time itself began to hum after that age, the slow spin of galaxies making music too wide for mortal ears, whole clusters of stars moving in rhythm, blackhead breathing like deep drums, comets singing in arcs through frozen dark. It wasn't superstition anymore. Scientists proved it, though most folks didn't need proof. They could feel it. The hum had gone from myth to measure, from belief to law. The universe, it turned out, was less a machine and more a song, an endless ball of motion and stillness, of creation finding harmony with its own eggs. And yet for all that wonder, man stayed man. Curiosity kept scratching at the edges of peace. There were explorers who wanted to chase the hum to its end, to see where the first note had been struck. They called themselves tone seekers, a kind of pilgrim unlike any before. Their ships were sleek and silent, tuned so fine that they glided through space without thrusters. Just the pull of resonance itself, foul vibrations too faint for any machine but the heart to catch. They didn't travel to conquer or to colonize, but to listen. Among them was a woman named Mara Dude, a descendant, at least by spirit, of Clay Wren himself. She was a quiet soul, though her eyes carried the same kind of storm you see gathering over an empty prairie. She'd been born aboard a hum hill, raised on the lull of cosmic tones, and when she came of age, she set her mind on finding what the ancients called the root note, the first vibration, the sound that set existence in motion. Her crew thought that madness, how could a zing tone still ring after all that time? But Mara believed if the hum is eternal, she'd say, then its first word is still speaking. For 20 years, she followed that whisper through nebula and void, charting what she called the great chord. Every planet, every moon, every particle had its own resonance, and when she mapped them, a pattern began to form, a spiral, vast and patient, reaching out toward a place no light had touched. That was where she turned her course. The journey took generations, for her ship moved not by force but by tone, drifting like a leaf on sound-let water. One by one her crew aged, rested, and passed, yet the ship sang on, keeping her company. In time, Mara became part of it. Her heartbeat synced with the hull low vibration, her breath the rhythm of the engines. She wasn't just uttering the hum anymore, she was in it. They say she reached the edge of the known stars at the age of 130, her hair silver in moonlight, her voice barely more than wind. Out there past where time seemed to have meaning, she found it a place where sound turned solid, where every vibration folded in on itself like a cord held too long. She called it the quiet verge. When her ship touched it, all sound stopped. Even her heartbeat fell still, but in that silence came a pulse slow, immeasurable, ancient. She understood then that the root note wasn't a thing that had been struck. It was still ringing forever, holding the universe together with one unbroken breath. She wrote her last words in the ship log before she vanished. Not the song that ends, it's the listener that fades. The tone waits patient until we find our way back. After that, her vessel disappeared from every scanner, every sight. Some think it melted into the verge, becoming part of the sound. Others believe it's still out there, humming between galaxies, carrying her voice with it, a lullaby for all creation. Back home, her recordings were played in temples and markets, in quiet homes and great halls. The tone she left behind, steady, deep, and impossibly calm, became known as the Dude frequency. It was said that playing it could still a storm or soothe a fevered mind. Farmers swore their crops grew stronger when it played through the fields. Healers found it slowed their own hearts, said enough to keep their hands steady through surgery. Even in the cold reaches of the mining moons, men who hadn't seen sunlight in months said it made them dream of warmth again. And so Mara Dune joined the lineage of the Hum Keepers, not by blood, but by act. From Clay Wren desert whisper to Mara cosmic silence, the chain was unbroken. Each had found the hum anew, each had kept it steady in their own way. Yet as long as there was someone, somewhere humming into the dark, the song would never stop. Now folks these days, those living under electric skies and glass towers, might think these tales are too old to matter. They've got machines that hum louder than any man could, lights that outshine stars, data singing through invisible waves. They think they've moved past the old stories. But late at night, when the power fades or the rain drowns out the static, you can still hear it if you're quiet enough. That low, patient note humming beneath the world. It don't care about progress or pride. It just is. The same as it always been. And maybe that the secret truth those old wanderers knew, that no matter how far you go, no matter how fast or loud the world gets, the hum's still there, waiting for you to slow down, to breathe, to listen, because the real wealth ain't in the sound itself, it in remembering to hear it. So sit a while, partner. Let the fire crackle low or the rain tap gentle on the roof. Close your eyes. There it is, that faint vibration hiding beneath your heartbeat. You don't have to chase it or name it or prove it. Just stay with it. Let it remind you what all those who came before were humming about. Balance, patience, steadiness, that the hum promised. It don't belong to anyone, and yet somehow it belongs to us all. Keep it steady always. There was a time, long after the hum had become religion and relic alike, when folks stopped speaking of it altogether. Not because they'd forgotten, because they didn't need to name it anymore. It was in everything they did. Every trade, every breath, every pause between one heartbeat and the next was a small act of harmony. They didn't build temples to worship it, didn't raise monuments to those who carried it forward. Instead, they lived that every moment was a quiet duet between themselves and the world. But dead always, time has a way of testing even the truest songs. 1,000 years passed, and the hum was no longer something folks felt with their bones. It was something stored in crystals and circuits and libraries of light. Machines could reproduce it perfectly, projecting tones through every city square, so constant and pure they almost felt sterile. The hum was no longer lived, it was manufactured. And while it filled the air, it had lost something vital. The spaces between the notes, the silences, the breath, the waiting were gone. People didn't notice at first. After all, the world was efficient. Crops grew, trade flowed, energy sang through towers that never darkened. But beneath that perfection, cracks began to whisper. The hum grew thinner, stretched by overuse. Children born in that age would sometimes shiver for no reason, clutching at their chests like they'd lost a sound they'd never known. Animals wandered from their herds, drawn to so faint aches beyond the edge of civilization. And the elders, those few who still remembered the old ways, would sit by the riverbanks humming the ancient tones, trying to coax the world back into rhythm. Among those elders was a woman named Solène Maris, a scholar turned wanderer. She'd grown up surrounded by synthetic tones, the kind piped through polished halls and humming towers, but something in her always knew it wasn't right. It too clean, she'd tell her students, the hum got to have dirt in it, dust, breath, life. Her colleagues laughed, calling her sentimental, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something sacred had been lost, that the hum had been stripped of the very imperfections that made it read. One night, while cataloging tone archives in the Grand Resonance Hall, she found an old file labeled simply "The 3D Frequency Original Capture." It was Myra Dewey's voice, recorded from the edge of the stars. When she played it, the sound was raw, uneven, full of static and trembling space. But beneath all that noise, there was warmth and unmistakable humanity. Solène wept. She realized then that the hum wasn't meant to be perfect. It was meant to feel. She left the city the next morning, traveling into the forgotten outskirts where the hum had long gone quiet. Her goal wasn't to restore it, but to find where it still lived naturally, if it did at all. She walked through abandoned farmlands, old mining valleys, ruined sound temples with walls still held faint vibrations from centuries' pace. In one of those places, deep in a canyon of cracked quartz and wind-worn stone, she found what she was looking for. A still, low tone hummed through the rock. Not steady, not constant, it rose and fell, breathing like a living thing. She pressed her ear against the stone and whispered, "It's still here." And the hum, slow and ancient, answered with a tremor that rattled her bones. It wasn't just sound, it was memory. Carried fragments of every hand that had not touched that canyon, every song sung there, every silence endured. Solène spent years studying that hum, recording it not with machines, but with her own body. She trained herself to match its rhythm, to let it guide her breath, her heartbeat, her steps. Over time, she stopped bringing instruments at aught. She became the instrument. Word spread, quiet and slow, of the woman who could hum the earth awake. Travelers came from the cities, curious and cautious, wanting to hear what real tones sounded like. They'd sit around her at night while she hummed by the canyon fire, and one by one they'd start humming too. No one led, no one followed. The sound just happened. The way rivers happen or dawn happens, it wasn't music, it was remembrance. And the canyon began to glow faintly, its stone veins lightened up but embers beneath ash. The hum was returning. Years later, when Solène passed, they didn't bury her, they laid her body in the canyon heart. And when the wind moved through the stone, her voice joined the tone forever. The people who'd learned from her scattered back to their homes, carrying pieces of that hum with them. They didn't try to recreate it with machines. They lived it planting slower, speaking softer, listening more. Some say that when the world truly healed, not through invention, but through remembering what was never meant to be lost, and that bet the story might have ended quietly. Most good stories do, if not for one small thing. 1,000 years after Solène Canyon lit the night, a lone signal was detected deep in the outer dark. It was faint, barely a whisper, but unmistakable in its rhythm. The root note, Mara Dune hum. Still ringing, still steady, still calling. No one knows who first answered, but someone did. A signal was sent back, not a broadcast, not a message, just a single low tone. And across the vast silence between stars, the hum grew stronger. For a brief moment, the universe itself seemed to shiver, as if remembering its own heart. Somewhere in that endless dark, the tone waited, patient, warm, eternal.
Like an old cowboy song humming over the rain, reminding whoever listening that the sound ain't gone. It's waiting for us to join back in. In the time that followed that last etch, humankind learned to live again with the patience of stone and the silence of stars. They'd hate the age that came, the era of listening. It was an age without conquest, without crowns, without the endless noise of progress that had once drowned their spirits. Instead, it was rocked by a sing, quiet vow to hear before acting. Cities became smaller, slower, no longer scraping the sky or burning the earth. They grew like garden woven into valleys, resting along rivers, humming in rhythm with wind and tide. Each dawn began not with machines nor alarms, but with tone. Across villages and towns, bells of carved stone or hollow wood sang low greetings to the morning, each tuned to the landscape it served. The mountains gave deep, rolling notes. The plains sang thin and clear. The sea hummed wide and sorrowful. The people didn't need clocks or councils. They let the hum guide their days. When its pitch rayed, it was time to work. When it fell, it was time to rest. When it vanished altogether, it meant only one thing: listen. But even in peace, there are always those who wonder. Among the listeners, a small few began to question whether the hum should remain untouched. They were engineers, dreamers, those who still carried the spark of the restless. They didn't mean harm, they simply wanted to understand. If the hum carries a memory, they asked, could we not learn from it directly? Could we not speak with it? And so, without vanity or greed, a small group built a device called the resonant bridge. It wasn't like the machines of old. No fuel, no wires, no command. It was shaped from living crystal, grown rather than built, and placed atop the same canyon that Solène bones had turned to light. Its purpose was simple: to amplify the hum until it could be heard by all, to let every living soul feel the song beneath the world. For years, the bridge was silent, absorbing tone from sky, water, and wind, storing it in its heart. Then, one evening, when the stars leaned close, it began to sing. The sound was unlike anything heard before. Wasn't loud, but it filled every corner of the world. Children froze mid-laughter. Farmers dropped their tools. Sailors at sea felt their ships slow. The waves themselves were listening. Even the old and the blind swore they could see the sound. Threads of gold drifting through the air, knotting together like fabric made of breath. Some cried, some prayed, but most simply sat and listened. The hum had come home again, not to memory, but the presence. The resonant bridge played for 3 days and 3 nights, changing subtly with each dawn. On the first day, the tone spoke of roots, of soil, of beginnings, of weight. On the second, it lifted, singing of water, movement, flow. On the third, it burned bright and clear in wind and fire, speaking of renewal. And when it finally quieted, the whole world shared a silence so deep it seemed sacred. Then, one by one, people began to hum back, not in imitation, not in worship, just an answer. From mountain to sea, from forest to city, a wave of low human sound rolled across the land. The bridge glowed once more, faint but steady, and then it slept. It never sang again, but it didn't need to.
The world had paved. The hum no longer came from stone or star. It came from people. They'd become part of the song themselves. Every voice, every gesture, every act of patience or grace was a note in the greater harmony. You could walk from one end of the continent to the other and never hear the same tone twice. Yet all of it fit together that verses in the same endless ballad. And though no one spoke of it aloud, every person knew somewhere out there, beyond the farthest quiet, the root note still waited, still ringing deep and true the way it always had. Some nights when the sky was clear and the wind carried just right, you could hear it faint in memory, a low thrum right in the horizon, steady as a heartbeat. It was comfort to those who feared and company to those who wandered, a reminder that even when LL fades, the hum endures. Many generations passed like that, softly, peacefully. The world aged kindly. Rivers carved new songs through stone. Mountains shifted slow but certain. And then, one day, a child was born with a strange gift. Could hear the hum even when no one would remember what he said. It was whispered in words, though not in any tongue known to man. They called him Iran of the Still Ear. He grew up in the canyon shadow, the very place where the bridge once sang. And though he lived simple, tending goats, mending nets, folks would come from far and wide to ask what the hum told him. He'd only smile and say, "It says the same thing it always has, keep it steady." When he was old and the world had changed again, machines returning with caution and care, someone asked him if the hum would end. He looked up at the stars, the same stars that had sung to Clay Wren, to Mara D. Dude, to Selena Maris, and he said, "It'll end the moment we stop listening." But along and one voice hums beneath the noise, the song goes on. And with that, he leaned back in his chair, eyes half closed, humming low to himself. As rain began to fall out of his cabin. That's how they found him later, peaceful still. His lips curved in a half smile, the fainted vibration still echoing through the air. No one dared call it death. They said the hum had simply taken him home, folded him back into the melody he'd carried his whole life. So maybe that's how it ends. Not with silence, but with someone, somewhere, keeping it steady. Not out of duty, not out of fear, but by they know the world better when it sings together. Maybe the hum ain't a sound at air. Maybe it's just a promise that nothing truly ends, that every tone, every life, every quiet breath adds up to something too vast to fade away. If you sit long enough by a fire or under rain that hums against your roof and you listen, not for words but for rhythm, you'll hear it too. That old song that's been playing since before names had meaning. Clay Wren's desert hymn, Mara D. Dude's starlit chord, Solantan lullaby. All the same note, echoing through time, whispering the same truth. Keep it steady always. And so the world moved onward, quiet but alive, each passing generation humming its own verse into the grand tune of existence. But even the most peaceful of melodies can't stay the same forever. The hum, like the wind, like the tide, has a way of shifting its pitch when the world forgets what it's singing for. Time, being what it is, began to stretch again, and people, being who they are, began to hurry once more. At first it was not much. A few towns decided to hoard their hums so they could play them louder during festivals. Scholars built instruments that could see the tones, turning them into color and light. It was beautiful work, honest and curious. But slowly, quietly, something began to change. The hum started to drift, not disappear, but distort. It grew brighter in some places, duller in others, and at once it had flowed like a single river. It began to fork and split, tumbling through the cracks of human walk. A young craftsman named Orem Vale laid it first. He worked with sound the way a blacksmith works, with fire shaping, bending, listening. His workshop sat on the edge of the glass plains, with wind rolled for miles without stopping, humming through the hollows of the earth like a bow across a cello. Orem had inherited the old tone rod from his grandmother, a relic tuned to the hum natural pitch. A young craftsman named Orem Vale laid it first. He worked with sound the way a blacksmith works, with fire shaping, bending, listening. His workshop sat on the edge of the glass plains, where wind rolled for miles without stopping, humming through the hollows of the earth like a bow across a cello. Orem had inherited the old tone rod from his grandmother, a relic tuned to the hum natural pitch. One morning, he struck it. The note came back off. It wasn't loud exactly, but it carried a sadness he'd never heard before, like a voice singing through cracked lips. Set out to find why, traveled from valley to ridge, from city to canyon. Everywhere he went, the tones were shifting. The hum hadn't died. It had fragmented. Some villages hummed in joy, others in despair. Some turned their hums into trade, recording and selling frequencies that made crops grow faster or eased pain. But the more they used it for gain, the less natural it became. The balance Clay Wren once whispered about, the patience Solenin taught, was slipping through calloused hands. And though no one meant harm, the hum was beginning to sound that the world had forgotten how to breathe together. Oron kept traveling, collecting fragments of the original tones, studying each like scripture. He began to notice patterns, faint traces of the root note buried in every local hum, like a hidden pulse reminding him the song was still there, just scattered. So he made it his life work to piece it back together. He built great tuning towers out of stone and brass, stretching high into the wind, each one tuned to a different fragment. He'd spend winks listening, adjusting, humming along until the tower joined the harmony. Some said he was mad. Others called him the tone shepherd. Years turned into decades. His hair went silver, his hands rough and scarred from working metal and wood. The towers spread far and wide, their deep chords rumbling through the ground like the footsteps of giants. Travelers said you could feel them humming beneath your boots for miles. The world began to shift, again slowly, tenderly, like an old wound remembering how to heal. People from distant lands started building their own towers, tuning them by ear, not by science. They didn't follow or exact notes. They didn't need to. What mattered was the effort. Each person listening, each person trying to tune back to something larger than themselves. When Oren grew too old to climb his ladders, he asked to be taken to the canyon of Solenimaris. He wanted to hear the source one last time. The people carried him there, and he stood before the resonant bridge, the air around him thick with memory. He began to hum. His voice cracked, but the canyon answered softly at first, then strong. The bridge woke not with the blinding glow of legend, but with a soft shimmer, like moonlight caught on water. The tone rose slow and low, and for a moment Oren smiled. He whispered, still steady, passed that night, sitting cross-legged beside the bridge, his tools laid neatly beside him. When dawn came, the people found that every tuning tower across the land was humming the same note. No one had struck them. No one had tuned them. They'd found their harmony on their own. It was said that for 3 whole days the wind itself refused to blow, just drifted in gentle circles, carrying the same deep hum from one horizon to the next. That day became known as the still wind. Not a holiday, not a holy day, just a reminder. Once a year, folks everywhere stop whatever they're doing, stand still, and listen. Not for orders, not for answers, but for alignment. You can hear it if you're quiet enough, a faint, even tone, like the heartbeat of the earth itself, steady and patient beneath the noise of life. And maybe that the trick to it, maybe the hum don't need to be perfect, or pure, or powerful. Maybe it just needs to be heard, by one voice, then another, until the silence between them turns into song again. Maybe Clay Wren, Maradu, Solen Maris, Oren Vale, they weren't heroes or prophets. Maybe they were real listeners who remembered to pause long enough to catch what the rest of us forgot. Because when the fire burns low and the rain starts to tap gentle on the tin, when the night feels too wide and your thoughts too loud, just stop. Don't reach for distraction. Don't chase the noise. Sit still. Somewhere deep under all that thinking and worrying, there's a hum waiting for you to remember. It ain't gone. It never was. It'd been keeping the world steady since before words had names, since before men knew how to count time. All you gotta do is listen. All you gotta do is keep it steady. They say after the still wind, the world never quite sounded the same again. Not 'cause it grew quieter, but 'cause it grew wiser. The hum was no longer just a thing to hear. It was a thing to feel, buried deep beneath the souls of every living thing. Grass bent in rhythm with it, rivers flowed softer, even thunder carried its pulse, rolling across the plains like a memory trying to remember itself. And though the old names had faded, Clay Wren, Mara Deed, Solen Maris, Oren Vale, their stories lived in tone. Campfires burned in little circles across the lands where elders told tales of the hum in low, slow voices, stretching words the way the wind stretches dust. They didn't call it finance, not anymore. They said it balance. The same truth dressed in humbler clothes. To live steady, to give before taking, to build with rhythm instead of rush. That was wealth now. In one of those little circles sat a man named Redan, an old trader with hands scarred from the weight of years and eyes bright to rain-polished stone. He wasn't rich by any measure of coin, but wherever he went, folks said his shadow carried the sound of harmony. He'd traveled the edges of the world where the hum ran thin, selling not gold nor grain, but patience. He'd fix broken scales, retune tone rods, teach miners how to dig without deafening the stone. When asked how he made a living off that, he'd grin slow and say, "The world pays back honest work in its own time." In the same harmony, the living natives of Mono Bing, and though the old names had faded, Clay Wren, Maradid, Solen Maris, all unveiled their stories lived in tone. Campfires burned in little circles across the lands, where elders told tales of the hum in low, slow voices, stretching words the way the wind stretches dusk. They didn't call it finance, not anymore. They said it balance, the same truth dressed in humbler clothes. To live steady, to give before taking, to build with rhythm instead of rush. That was wealth now. In one of those little circles sat a man named Redan, an old trader with hands scarred from the weight of years and eyes bright to rain-polished stone. He wasn't rich by any measure of coin, but wherever he went, folks said his shadow carried the sound of harmony. He'd traveled the edges of the world where the hum ran thin, selling not gold nor grain, but patience. He'd fix broken scales, retune tone rods, teach miners how to dig without deafening the stone. When asked how he made a living off that, he'd grin slow and say, "The world pays back honest work in its own time." You gotta wait for the return. One winter, and frost crept down from the high cliffs, Redden came upon a valley so quiet it unnerved even him. Not the kind of quiet born from peace, but the kind that comes after something been broken. The folk there were starved, not for food, but for trust. Their crops wouldn't grow, their wells had turned sour, and the hum was gone. He could feel it missing, like a tooth pulled from the mouth of the earth. They'd built machines to tin and irrigate faster, to make more in less time, but in doing so, they'd silenced the tone that guided the soil. Their rush had outpaced their rhythm. He stayed. Didn't promise salvation, didn't quote scripture, just started humming while he worked. Low, steady, constant. At first, folks thought he was mad, wandering their fields muttering to the dirt. But by the third day, a strange thing happened. The wind shifted. It started carrying his hum down the rows, soft at first, then stronger. The machines began to move smoother, less harsh. The water stopped bucking against the channels and began to flow even. Children followed him, humming along. Then their mothers. Then the men, and before long the whole valley was vibrating like a living core. The crops didn't spring up overnight, no miracles there, but when the thaw came, the fields greened again. Slow, patient, like breath returning to tired lungs. They offered him gold for it. He refused. Said the hum didn't belong to anyone, said they that needed to remember how to listen while working. Before he left, he told them one last thing, something Clay Wren himself might have whispered if he'd been there. A man's wealth ain't what he stores, it's what he can steady when the world starts to shake. He wandered for years after that, fixing hums wherever they faltered, small towns, trade ports, even the frozen spires of the north. Each place, he taught the same lesson in a different way. Some he left with songs, some he left with silence, and every now and then on cold nights he'd sit by a fire, pull his coat close and stare into the dark, whisper and keep it steady. He never said who he was speaking to, maybe the world, maybe the hum itself, maybe just his own weary bones. When age finally caught up to him, it did so kindly. Found himself back in that first quiet valley, now full of sound. Children played by streams that sang, and the old machines had been turned into great wind harps that played with every gust. They offered him a home. He built one small hut at the edge of a field and spent his last years teaching the young how to tune themselves for tuning the land. Said a man work don't mean much if his heart out of pitch. On his last night, the rain came soft and steady. He sat on his porch humming into the dark when the tone shifted deep, vast, familiar. It was not from the sky nor the earth, but from everywhere at once. The root note, the same one that had rung in Clay Wren chest, in Maradoon ship, in Solane Canyon. He chuckled low, wiped the rain from his beard, and said, "Well, I'll be damned. Guess you were listening after all." Then he closed his eyes and hummed one last time, his voice sinking into that greater chord until it was no longer a part, but a part. When the people found him the next morning, the hut was gone, just a ring of blackened soil and wildflowers hemming faintly in the wind. They built no monument, didn't need to. His story, the hum, moved on, carried in traders' songs and farmers' plows and the rhythm of men counting their blessings instead of their burdens. Years later, when the valley grew into a great crossroads, merchants said something odd. Every coin struck there carried a faint vibration, a tone you could only hear when the market went still. Some said it was luck, some said it was the spirit of trade made honest. But the old ones smiled, leaned on their canes and said, "Nah, that's just Redden keeping it steady." So the hum lived on, not in towers, not in temples, but in the simple exchanges between folk who'd learned what real wealth was. Not faster, not louder, just true. The kind you could hear in a handshake or a promise kept or a quiet song hummed under the breath while watching rain fall on the roof. The kind that says in every note, all is steady, all returns. Keep humming, friend.
Hum after Redden hum drifted into legend. The world settled into a rhythm so subtle you could almost miss it. If you weren't the listening type, the folks who lived then didn't chase noise anymore. They let quiet lead them there. It wanted. Fields grew where patience was thick. Rivers found their way back to old beds, humming low and calm. Even trade changed its tone. No one shouted for deals or carved profit from panic. They weighed their words like seeds, careful way they landed, knowing not every field needed plowing. One of those quiet souls was a girl named Lyra. She'd grown up by the edge of a salt plain where the air shimmered like glass and the earth sang when the wind crossed it just right. Her folks were keepers of old trade posts, the kind that traded in tone rods, humstones, and stories. Travelers came from every corner, offering what they'd heard, what they'd seen, and sometimes what they'd lost. Lyra spent her days listening to M, collecting fragments of their songs the way others might collect coins. Some told tales of great harmony, others of silence so deep it made their bones ache.
But one story stayed with her, the one about Red Dan last hum. They said if you stood in the right place at the right hour, you could still hear it, steady and low beneath the thunder of trade and talk. Most called it myth. But Lyra, she had a knack for catching truth hidden inside tall tales. So she made herself a promise she'd find that sound. Not to own it, not to profit from it, but to learn from it. Because somewhere deep down, she felt the hum was changing again, drifting away from its center like smoke on a restless breeze. She left the trade post one dawn, carrying little more than a tone, rod carved from driftwood and a map drawn on parchment so worn it looked like it had been crying ink. Her journey took her through towns that still hummed, steady, and those that didn't hum at all. She met folk who remembered it, still went, others who'd never heard of Clay Wren or the bridge or any of it. Some had turned the hum into fashion, building taverns so false tones played for coin, sounding near right but feeling wrong. The rhythm of the world was fraying not from greed or war this time, but from forgetfulness, the kind that seeps in when comfort grows too loud. One night, deep in a canyon older than the written word, Lyra made camp beside a pool that caught the moonlight like silver dust. She'd been humming to herself, same low tone Red Dan was said to favor, when the water began to tremble, not from wind, not from footsteps, just trembled gentle and sure. Then they heard it, faint, buried under her own voice, a note deeper than the world itself. The root note. It was cracked now, softer, like it had been waiting too long to be found. She knelt, pressed her ear to the water and whispered, "What do you need?" The hum answered, not in words, but in weight. A pull inside her chest, like the earth itself had breathed and she'd caught the exhale. She knew then what she had to do. The hum wasn't dying, it was tired. It needed new voices to carry it. So she traveled again, this time not to find the hum, but to teach others how to listen.
She built circle, no walls, no pulpits, just open air and stone seats. And there she taught the art of steady sound. Not music, not chant, just breath and tone, simple as heartbeat. Folks would come tired, angry, desperate for answers. She'd tell them to hush. You can't hear the hum over your own noise, she'd say, and the world won't speak till you stop shouting questions. Word spread days always does when peace is rare. Farmers claimed their crops grew thicker after sitting in her circles. Miners said their tunnels stopped collapsing. Children fell asleep easier, dreaming of rivers singing instead of storms crashing. And though no one called it worship, O began to treat her like a prophet. She didn't much like that. "I ain't a prophet," she'd say with a grin. "I'm just a woman who learned to keep it steady."
When she grew old, she returned to the salt plain where she'd started. The trade post was gone now, swallowed by sand and time, but the wind still crossed it just right. She planted her tone rod in the center of that plain and hummed one last time. The ground answered, soft and sure, and for a heartbeat the hum rose across the horizon, carrying every voice that had the jointed clay, Mara Slen El Rard reddened, all the way down to hers. The sky shimmered, the earth sighed, and the tone sank back into silence, leaving behind a stillness so deep it made the stars listen. They say to this day, if you cross that salt plain in the hush between night and dawn, you'll feel it under your boots. Not loud, not even clear, just enough to make you stop and smile without knowing why. That the hum's still humming, the world still remembering, and maybe, just maybe Lyra herself reminding anyone willing to listen. Don't rush your days, don't weigh your worth by what shines. Listen first, work gentle, keep it steady. When the winds changed again, and they always did, sooner or later, the hum didn't vanish this time. It stretched, it found new hands, new hearts, new ways to stay alive. The world was older now, quieter in its bones, but louder in its reach. Traders crossed skies instead of plains, carrying goods between stars instead of towns, but the same truth still beat beneath every deal and every word. Keep it steady. They called the new frontier the still market. Great orbiting rings where ships docked and bartered not debt for metal or fuel, but for harmony itself. Each trader had their own tone, stone tuned by lineage or by luck, and when deals were struck fair and clean, both stones sang together. A faint hum that meant balance had been kept. You could hear it edge through the airlock sometimes, like old ghosts whispering, "Well done, partner." Among those ring traders was a woman named Sarah Tollin. She wasn't born into wealth, nor did she chase it. She grew up in a scrapyard colony where folks lived off what the big haulers left behind. Her father taught her two things: how to fix the engine that didn't want fixing, and how to listen for a tone that told the truth. Machines lie with sparks, he used to say, but sound don't.
Tells you what real if you've got the patience to hear it. By 20.
Sarah had built her own ship from junk and prayer. It wasn't much, just a patched hull, a low hum of borrowed parts, and a dream too stubborn to quit. She started trading in the low roots, water, minerals, old tech, but it wasn't her cargo that made her name. It was the way she worked her ledgers. She never cheated, never shorted, never shouted. She'd hum before every deal, low and even, eyes closed like she was measuring the space between trust and truth. Somehow, every trade she made prospered, not quick, but certain. Her partner stayed loyal. Her roots stayed safe. And little by little, her scrap ship became the most reliable hauler on the still market. They called her the Tone Captain, not because she was rich or ruthless, but because every deal she touched held the same steady hum. She taught her crew the old ways, not written rules, but sung ones.
Tells you what, really, if you've got the patience to hear it. By 20, Sarah had built her own ship from junk and prayer. It wasn't much, just a patched hull, a low hum of borrowed parts, and a dream too stubborn to quit. She started trading in the low routes, water, minerals, old tech. But it wasn't her cargo that made her name, it was the way she worked her ledgers. She never cheated, never shorted, never shouted. She'd hum before every deal, low and even, eyes closed like she was measuring the space between trust and truth. And somehow every trade she made prospered, not quick, but certain. Her partner stayed loyal, her roots stayed safe, and little by little her scrap ship became the most reliable hauler on the still markets. They called her the Tone Captain, not because she was rich or ruthless, but because every deal she touched held the same steady hum. She taught her crew the old ways, not written rules, but sung ones.
Before every voyage, they'd sit in the cargo bay, lights dim, and hum the ledger tune, a thin rising note, then falling back to center. That the sound of Hearn, she'd say. You give what you take, and the circle stays round. But peace, even in the stars, has a way of drawing envy. One day, a rival named Garrick Sloan challenged her in the Market Council, claimed she was using false tones, that her hums were manipulations that bent deals unfairly in her favor. He wanted her tone stones tested, her methods dissected, regulated, taxed. Sarah didn't fight back with anger. She just smiled slow, that kind of calm that makes louder men nervous. You think the hum mine? She asked. It ain't. It everyone. I just listen better. They laughed her out of the hall. But laughter, like greed, don't last. Within a year, Sloan's roots dried up, the ships broke down, his traders quit. Turns out the tone he'd been humming wasn't steady. It was strained, forced, born from fear instead of faith. The market don't reward that kind of rhythm. It collapses on itself like bad welding. Meanwhile, Sarah hum kept spreading. Traders who'd once mocked her started tuning their own ledgers by ear instead of greed.
Soon the whole still market began to sound that one long, gentle chord drifting through the void. On her last voyage, Sarah carried no cargo, just silence. She said the hum needed rest, that it was starting to fray again from overuse. She piloted her ship to the edge of known space, near the Veil Nebula, where late then slow enough for a person to think. Her crew offered to go with her, but she refused. That ain't a job for more voices, she said. It a job for quiet. They say she docked her ship into the nebula and cut the engines. No one heard from her again. But months later, traders passing that same stretch of space swore they heard a faint hum over the static of their radio, soft, deep, familiar. It wasn't her ship, it was her tone. The same steady sound that had kept the markets fair and the journeys true. It spread through the communication lines like breath through glass, reaching every hauler, every station, every lonely miner with an ear for truth. And from then on, every new trader was taught one simple phrase before they set out. Don't shout your price, hum your worth. Ain't that something? Out in the coldest dark where sound don't travel, the hum still found a way to move, not through air but through hearts, through patience, through honesty, steady enough to cross the stars without burning out. The tone captain never came back, but us say when the void gets too quiet, you can still hear her soft low somewhere between silence and song, keeping the ledger even across the endless black. And maybe that all the world really needed, not heroes, not saints, just folk who remember how to keep the hum going. Soft, honest, true, like breath under the rain, or wind through an old porch rail, or the sound of gold coins sliding across a tave fair and square. Wealth ain't what you hoard, but what you steady.
Or if you find yourself out there too far from home, too deep in the noise, close your eyes, don't pray, don't panic, just hum, low and slow, the world will answer. It always does, it's just waiting for someone patient enough to keep it steady. Generating later, when the tone captainship had long dissolved into dust and her name had turned to a whisper, the hum still drifted across the reaches of the quiet universe. It traveled not in light nor in signal, but in the habits of people who didn't even know they were humming. Every steady craftsman who sharpened a blade by rhythm instead of rush, every farmer who timed his planting by the sound of the wind instead of the clock, every trader who closed a deal with a nod instead of a shout, they were all carrying it. That same old hum keeping the world even. Down on a frontier planet tied barren reach, that hum found itself in the hands of a boy named Cole. He was born to nothing, a family of dust miners working the gay plains where storms came in like debts and left slower than sorrow.
His ma told him stories of the hum to help him sleep, tales of quiet traders and fair captains who balanced their ledgers with patience instead of pride. His pa, on the other hand, that taught him how to survive. The world will take if you ain't watching. He'd say you keep your ears open and your mouth shut. Cole listened. He grew up with wind in his lungs and silence in his thoughts, watching how the old machinery moved with a rhythm older than words. He began humming without meeting to sing tone. His ma used to hum when she fixed torn work gloves or mended broken lamps. At first, it was just comfort. But then something strange happened. Machines started responding to him. Pumps ran smoother. Drills stopped jamming. Lights steadied instead of flickering. The overseer, Nate and Gold Brisson, said he had a luck tongue. Luck? That what folks hauled it when they couldn't explain what patience could do. Years passed and Cole grew from boy to man. His hands hardened, the stones he dug, and his voice low from singing to the dark. But the mines weren't kind, and greed had crept back into the world like a sickness. Corcoran had moved in, replacing old miners with faster machines that dug too deep, too fast. The hum was still there, but buried under the grind of progress that didn't listen. When the first collapse came, it took 200 souls with it. The machines had ignored their rhythm. The land had warned them in its old slow hum, but nobody'd stopped to hear it. Cole did. He stood in the wreckage, covered in dust and loss, and for the first time in his life, he felt the hum falter, like it was crying under the weight of men who'd forgotten what steady meant. So he swore he'd bring it back. Not that a tale or a tone, but that a way. He left the mines and started traveling from camp to camp, fixing old tools and teaching the rhythm of maintenance. A machine like a man, he'd say. It don't break from work, it breaks from being rushed. Folks began calling him Cole the Keeper. His lesson spread slow but sure. Mechanics learned to listen to their gear. Farmers learned to listen to their fields. Traders learned to listen to their silence. And before long, the hum started seeping back through the cracks, quiet, invisible, but alive again. Then came the storms. Whole continents whipped into great tempests, lightning rolling across the plains like a drumbeat from hell. Colonies called for help, but their calms were dead.
power grids failed, the hum vanished again, swallowed by static. Cole left whoever he could, miners, farmers, haulers, folk who still remembered how to listen, and they built great towers of iron and sand glass, same hand Oren Vale once built long ago. Only these weren't for trade or wealth, they were for tuning the sky. Each tower was a song of steel, humming low to calm the wind. They didn't fight the storm, they aligned with it. When lightning struck, the tone shifted, deepened, and steadied the air around it. The clouds began to curl inward like they were remembering something old in time. The first tower held through the night, then the second. By the third dawn, the storm broke apart, not from power, but from balance. After that, Cole didn't have to teach anymore. The towers spoke for him.
They call them the still engines, and they became the heart of every settlement from Barren Reach to the far ring. They didn't run on oil or ore or spark, they ran on patience. On the steady hum of countless souls remembering that life only stays upright when it moves in rhythm with itself. Cole lived long enough to see a world rebuilt by quiet hands. He never claimed credit. When folks thanked him, he'd done smile a dusty grin and say, "Weren't me. It was the hum, just needed someone to listen loud enough." He died the same way he'd lived, soft, steady, sitting beneath one of the towers as it sang its deep metallic tune. Some say the tower changed pitch that day. Others say it didn't need to. The wind already knew. When they buried him, they didn't stone. They used glass melted from the sand that had once stormed against them. It caught the light gut right, refracting into a faint shimmer, looked almost like sound if sound would glow, and so the story circled back. It always did. From miners to traders, from traders to hum keepers, from hum keepers to silence.
Cycle unbroken by time or distance, reminding those still rhythms, the same old truth passed down from Clay Wren campfire to Sarah cockpit to coal towers. The world don't pay the loud, it rewards the steady. And the hum, whether in dust or rain or stars, keeps singing for those patient enough to wait between beats. When coal towers became part of the horizon, folks thought maybe that'd be the end of it. The hum settled, the storms tamed, the ledgers even it out. Stories have a way of stretching further than the folks who start them. The hum didn't stop, it just changed again, slipping through time like a long breath between generations. It found new homes in unlikely places, in the clicks of machines that weren't built to sing, in the hearts of people who've never seen stars or salt plains, and in the small, persistent moments that refused to be hurried. One such place was a town built on the edge of a cliff sea, where waves hit the rocks so hard the air turned white. It was called Gray Morin, a place that never slept because its windmills never did.
They spun day and night, humming a chorus older than the town itself. The folks there had long forgotten why the mills sang. They just knew they did, and that if the sound didn't stop, bad luck would fall with shadow at noon. Among them was a boy named Hollis Dane. He was an odd sort, quiet to moonlight, curious at thunder. His family worked the docks, patching sails and sorting trade crates that came in from the still markets. But Hollis didn't care much for trade. What caught him was the mills, their blades singing against the wind, the gearworks below grinding steady in breath. He'd sneak up there after dusk, sitting in the rafters and listening till the sound sank into his bones. It wasn't just noise to him, it was language. As years rolled on, the mills started faltering. The storms that once powered him turned strange. Gusts came too sudden, or not at all. Some mills broke, others stilled, and the hum that had cradled Gray Morin for centuries began to fade. The traders called it bad timing. The priests called it punishment. But Hollis called it silence, and he couldn't bear it.
He started fixing the mills himself, using scrap and study humming low as he worked. Nobody taught him the tune. It just came to him, same way it came to Cole, same way it came to Redan before. The sound drew folk back to watch. They said when Hollis touched the broken blade, the wind seemed to listen like it remembered him from another life. Soon enough, the mill started turning again, not perfect but patient, not loud but alive. Word spread, that it always does when someone steadies the world. Traders came to buy his designs, engineers came to test him, and one day, the governor of Gray Morin taught him to the high hall. "You brought fortune back to the town," the man said, "and I'd see your hum bottled and sold." Hollis just smiled, slow and canned, like all good listeners do. "Sir," he said, "you can't bottle what already inside everything that breathes." They didn't like that answer, so they took his mills, tore them down piece by piece, and built new ones, metal giants powered by lightning and greed, tuned to make more wind, not better wind. For a while it worked.
The hum was louder, sharper, richer, but it wasn't steady. The air began to warp, the tides grew mean, and the sea, tired of being disrespected, rose one night without warning.
It hit Graymorin like a debt come due. The new mills tore free, flying into the black, and the whole cliff shook itself clean. When the water receded, all that was left standing was one old wooden mill Hollis. The people found him sitting by it at dawn, soaked through, humming to the gears that still turned. He never said a word about what happened, just rebuilt the town plank by plank, teaching the survivors how to hum when they worked. Don't fight the sea, he told them. Learn her rhythm, she part of the same song they did. And Graymorin grew again, not big, not rich, but balanced. The mills sang, the waves listened, and the air carried a tune so calm it made storms change their minds. When Hollis passed, they found no fortune, no inventions, no maps, just a sea phrase carved into the post of his mill. Every sound a promise, keep it steady, and that was that. The traders forgot him within a decade, but sailors still whispered his name when the ocean grew loud. They'd hum his tone under their breath, steadying the ropes and the sails, swearing it made the winds behave better. Maybe it did. Maybe it was just fate. Either way, it kept him alive. So the hum went on. Across salt plains, through space, under seas, it always found its way back to people who needed it most. Not the loud, not the proud, but the patient. The ones who fixed before they cursed, who listened before they spoke, who gave before they took. Maybe that why it never died, maybe that why it never will. They say if you stand on the cliffs of Graymorin now, right before dawn, when the tide pulls back and the wind still holds its breath, you'll hear it. The low hum riding the edge of the waves. You might think it's just the sea or the mills or your own heart echoing in your ribs, but if you've got even a shred of patience left in you, you'll know better. The same hum that Clay Wren once carried through a desert, that Sarah Tolan sent through the stars, that Cole the Keeper steadied in his towers. It the hum that built every fortune worth keeping and mended every life worth living. And when you hear it, you don't thank the hum. You hum back. Long after Graymorin had settled into legend, and its story was traded between sailors like a song half remembered at dawn, the hum wandered inland again quiet, as it always was. This time, it found the dust roads where machines rolled on tires older than the towns they passed. The world had changed. The seas were calmer, the skies clearer, and the noise of industry filled her breath of air. But even there, under the wire and clatter of man progress, the hum waited. It always did. It came to a place owed Old Sable Junction, a train stop forgotten by every schedule that once fed it. Rusted tracks cut through dry earth, and 100 iron beasts lay abandoned in the yard, their engines silent, their whistles long since swallowed by time. The people who stayed there were mostly ghosts of industry mechanics, too old to leave, drifters too tired to care, and one man who never left because he didn't know how to. His name was Marlin Pike. Marlin wasn't much to look at, broad-shouldered, scarred, with grease beneath his nails that no amount of wash could lift. He'd been a rail worker once when the junction still mattered, back when trains sang across the land like thunder with purpose. But when the new sky haulers came and the iron roads fell silent, Marlin stayed behind to tend to what was left. Not 'cause it paid, not 'cause it mattered to anyone else, but 'cause he swore he could still hear the engines hum when the wind was right. Every morning he'd make coffee so thick it could stand on its own, then walk down the line, laying his hand on the cold metal of the trains. Sometimes, if he pressed his ear close, he'd catch a vibration. Not quite a sound, more like a heartbeat the world had forgotten, and that was enough to keep him going. Years passed. The junction sank furred into ruin. The townfolk left for better places, and the desert started reclaiming the rails. But one day, out of the heat shimmer, a woman stepped off a dust crawler and into the yard. Said her name was Elira, a traveler from the south, looking for old tech to salvage. She was young, but carried herself like someone who'd been listening to the world longer than she'd been alive. When she found Marlin under the shade of a broken engine, she didn't ask him for directions or prices, just asked, "You would hear it?" Marlin lit up. "Hear what?" "The hum," she said. And the way she said it made the air stand still. He stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slow. Thought I was the last fool left who remembered it. Together, they walked through the yard, touching the metal carcasses one by one. Elira pulled a small device from her pack, old tech, cobbled together from scraps of antenna and glass. She said it was a resonator, something her grandmother used to tune machines that had forgotten their own sound. She set on a train boiler, twisted a few dials, and the air filled with a faint vibration, low, steady, deep,
The hum, not loud, not grand, but real. Marlin's eyes went wide. Well, I'll be damned, he whispered. They worked for weeks, cleaning, patching, listening. Every train they touched began to wake, and not to move, but to remember. The yard started singing again, soft and layered, each old engine finding its note until the whole place throbbed with harmony. The townfolk who'd left started drifting back, drawn by rumors of the singing yard. Children danced on the tracks. Merchants built stalls again. For the first time in 50 years, Old Said Junction breathed. But when word reached the new corporations in the capital, they sent men to silence it. They claimed the resonance was dangerous, that the hum disrupted the signal grids. Truth was, they couldn't own it, and anything they couldn't own, they feared. They came with machines that swallowed sound dampeners that drank the very air of music. The yard fell silent in minutes. Marlin stood before them, old wrenching in, back bent but unbroken. You can shut off machines, he said, but you can't kill what makes them move. They arrested him, tore the yard apart, and left the place dead again. When they released him months later, Ira was gone. No one knew Wade. The resonator, too, had vanished. Marlin returned to the yard, sat on the same rail he always had, and waited. For a while, there was nothing. No sound, no wind, no promise. But one night, when the desert cooled and the stars burned low, he heard it again, faint beneath the sand, a hum rising from the bones of the earth itself. He smiled then, soft and tired, and said to no one, "Guess you can't bury a song that already under your feet?" A year later, travelers started reporting strange things. The abandoned rails of old Sable glowed faint at night, humming like iron lullabies. The trains, though rusted and hollow, seemed to shift positions between dawn and dusk, as if dreaming their old routes again.
Some swore they saw an old man walking along the tracks, lantern in one hand, humming the tune that made the air tremble. Some said it was Marlin Ghost, others said it was the hum itself taking a shape it trusted. Whatever truth there was, it didn't matter much. The yard stayed alive, not loud, not rich, not famous, just steady. The people who came after didn't talk about profit or invention. They that said the world needs its tune, and we're the ones to keep it playing. Maybe that the oldest truth there is, that every man and woman born into the dust owes a little hum back to it. Not a shout, not a scream. Just that small promise to keep things moving, to keep them honest, and to never let the silence win. Time drifted forward like a tired river, slow and certain. The hum wound its way into new corners of the world, sometimes heard, sometimes only felt. It never announced itself. It didn't belong to the powerful, nor to the clever. It found the patient, it found the one still working with calloused hands and quiet eyes.
Somewhere far from the sea and the rails, on a wide stretch of golden grassland where thunder rolled like a heartbeat, they found a rancher named Eli Maron. Eli wasn't rich, wasn't poor, just stuck, the way many good men get when they spend too long watching horizons that never seem to come close. He ran a small ranch on land that had belonged to his father, and his father before that. The soil had turned mean with the years, dry and bitter, and the cattle thinned until even the wind sounded hollow when it crossed the pen. The neighbors packed up, heading east towards cities that promised more shine and less sweat. But Eli stayed. Said the land still spoke, even if its voice was cracked. He had a little cabin by the stream that only ran half the year, and every evening he'd sit on the porch, whittling scraps of wood into nothing in particular. The sun would dip behind the hills, the sky would bruise into purple, and he'd hum soft and low, mostly out of habit.
Some nights it was a tune from his mama. Some nights it was nothing at that. Got a vibration in his chest that fit the sound of the crickets. He didn't know where it came from, only that it felt older than him. One summer the drought came harder than in before. The stream went dry. The ground cracked open like a ledger left unpaid. Eli tried everything, dug deeper wells, prayed, cursed, bargained, but the earth stayed silent. On the 5th week without rain, his last windmill broke. The bearings lack and the fan stilled. For the first time in his life, the hum was gone. The silence pressed down like judgment. He sat by that dead windmill all night, listening to the nothing. Just before dawn, when his thoughts had gone dry to the soil, he heard a sound soft, faint, steady, not from the sky, but from the ground beneath him. A hum, low and patient, same tone he'd always hummed without knowing why. He pressed his ear to the earth, and he swore it was answering him. He got to work before the sun rose, dug not for water, but for resonance.
Yes, built a frame of old pipes and tools, something halfway between a well and an instrument. Hammering iron rods deep into the dirt. When the wind came at dusk, it brushed across those pipes and made a tone, not loud, but full. The air trembled with it, and for the first time in months, Eli felt the land breathe again.
She kept adding more rods, more pipes, tuning them make a man tuning a guitar. Soon the whole plain was humming a low, endless note that carried for miles. The cattle stopped wandering, the birds came back, and then, one evening, the rain returned. It didn't roar or flash, it did arrive, falling in rhythm with the hum sinking into the dirt like a promise finally kept. Word spread, it always does. Folks from towns over came to see the singing. Ranch scientists thought machines, preachers bought prayers, and wanderers wrought stories of other hums in other places. Eli didn't argue with any of them. He just said, "It ain't mine." I just listened first. Over the years, the land his ranch grew fertile again. Grass rolled green, the stream ran steady, and new families came to settle. They didn't call it luck or miracle. They held it the Marin tone. Some claimed it kept storms calm, others said it healed crops, but Eli never tried to prove any of it. He just tended the rods, kept them clean, kept them humming.
When he was too old to work, he taught the children how to listen for the right pitch, the one that wasn't quite sound but wasn't silence either. Before he passed, he led them down the porch one last evening. The rain had dead stopped and the sunset hit the wet grass like gold dust. He told them, "Don't chase the hum. You ain't supposed to find it. You're supposed to earn it for being still long enough for it to find you." Then he closed his eyes, leaned back in his chair, and drifted off with that same faint smile he'd worn since the first hum rose from the ground. When the wind turned that night, the pipes sang on their own, mournful but calm. After Eli was gone, the ranchers kept the tone alive. They built instruments of steel and wood, burying them in the earth to sing with the wind. Over generations, those hums connected from one plain to the next until the whole region pulsed like a slow heartbeat. Planes flew overhead and felt turbulence drop away. Travelers said they could sense a calm just passing through. It wasn't magic, not in the way folks talk about miracles.
It was discipline. It was rhythm. It was the world remembering how to listen. And somewhere far beyond that, in the dark, between stars, where no air carried sound, the hum still traveled. Maybe it wasn't even a tone anymore. Maybe it had become the way gravity moved, or the way patience itself stretched through space. But if you could stand in that silence, in that endless stillness between worlds, you might yet hear it again. The same note that started by a campfire long ago, carried through miners, traders, dreamers, ranchers, and mechanics alike. A note that said, "Balance ain't found, it kept."
And that how the world, for all its noise and motion, stays alive. Not through power, not through gold, but through a hum too old to own, too steady to silence, too human to the dive. Years later, the Morin tone spread beyond the plains. Folks started recording it, remixing it, studying it, but none could quite pin down what made it work. Scientists said it was resonance and vibration aligning with the soil frequency. Preachers called it a hymn from creation. Philosophers said it was a reminder that not all power needs to shout.
A place where would rarely reach the hum took on new meaning for someone else entirely. There was a woman named Hansel Ray who lived in a city of glass and noise. A world so fast that silence had to be bought in capsules.
She worked at a firm that traded futures and fragments of time. As people wagered on tomorrow's seconds like gamblers. She was good at it, too good. They'd ate her the clock whisperer for years because she could sense when a market was about to turn before the numbers even blinked red. But she couldn't sleep. The noise of her own success never stopped ringing in her skull. One evening, her computer glitched. The screens froze mid-trade, all graphs and figures evaporating until there was static. Beneath that, she heard something faint, a tone, low and steady. It wasn't the hum of servers or electricity. It was slower, deeper, older. She turned off every machine in her flat, but the sound stayed. When she pressed her ear against the floor, she realized it was coming from below. The next day, she went looking for its source.
Sub-levels, past power conduits, maintenance tunnels, until she reached the lowest level of the city of forgotten chamber, half buried in dust. There, between pillars of concrete, she found an old machine. It wasn't rocked by any company or nation. Its gears turned so slowly you could mistake it for stillness, and it hummed. The sound wrapped around her chest like a heartbeat that was not hers. For weeks she came back to that place. She'd sit cross-legged before the machine, closing her eyes, breathing with the hum until her pulse matched it. Slowly, the chaos in her mind softened. Her trades became calmer, wiser. She stopped chasing volatility and started predicting balance. People thought she'd found that new algorithm, done secret code that bent time itself. But the truth was simpler. She had learned to listen. Her fortune multiplied, but so did her stillness. She began using her wealth to restore parts of the city others had forgotten. Quiet parks between skyscrapers, reflection pools where people could stop for a minute without buying the right to do so. At first, folks mocked it. Stillness don't pay, they said. But the markets made it. Productivity rose where calm took root. Accidents dropped. A while, even the cynics had to admit the hum was good business. One night, Ansel brought her closest colleagues down to the chamber. "You would think this place is magic," she told them. "It ain't. Be disciplined. The hum doesn't change for anyone. We're the ones who shift to meet it." They didn't understand, not fully, but they tried. Some stayed, others left, but the seed was planted. Years later, when she passed on, her will contained no fortune, no empire, just instructions. Keep the hum alive. Don't patent it, don't sell it, just listen. The machine was sealed beneath crystal glass, but its vibrations still carried through the city bones. People said it made elevators move smoother, traffic lights blink softer, even tempers shorten slower. The markets above grew steadier, and nobody could quite explain why. The hum had once lived in deserts and oceans, now it lived in circuitry and breath. But it was the same story all over again, the same rhythm passed through different hands, always finding those who needed it, always teaching the same quiet truth, that wealth, real wealth, ain't the number on a ledger, the harmony between what you take and what you give. It knowing when to let the world breathe through you, not debt for you. And maybe that what the hum always was, not sound, not science, but memory. The memory of balance, of patience, of the small mercy that built every miracle man mistook for luck. If you find yourself walking through that glass city late at night, you might catch it. Beneath the engines, beneath the chatter and the hum of screams, there are tones that don't belong to any man. It ain't trying to be heard, it's just waiting for someone still enough to remember that every beat of progress needs a pause between. That pause, my friend, that field of hum lives, always has, always will.